Chapter 188. Housekeeper Lin asked for a prescription from Xia Qing and was ordering the servants to get the medicine when he saw the carriage of Jinying Wangfu rushing back. He was wondering why they came back so early when he saw the curtain being lifted from the inside. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji half supporting and half carrying a person out. Who else could it be if it wasn't Jiang Ruan? Although old Lin was more than 50 years old, his eyes were sharp. With one glance, he noticed the bloodstain at the corner of Jiang Ruan's mouth. His heart skipped a beat when he saw that Xiao Xiao was not there. He immediately jogged over and said, "What's going on? What happened to young Furen?" "Young Furen fainted." Bai Ji said anxiously, "Quickly call the physician. Housekeeper Lin, please send someone to help young Furen back." Housekeeper Lin became anxious when he heard this. This was not the first day of marriage, how could such a scene happen? Thinking that there was a divine physician in the neighboring Fu, he immediately sent someone to invite Xia Qing to take a look. When Jiang Ruan was helped to lie down in the room, Housekeeper Lin immediately asked Lian Xiao, "Young Furen was fine, why did she faint? How did you take care of young Furen?" Lu Zhu and Tian Zhu also rushed over when they heard this. There were no other wounds on Jiang Ruan's body, so it didn't seem like she was injured. Lian Xiao blamed herself, met fourth young mistress in the palace and spoke a few words with fourth young mistress. After returning to the carriage, she started to feel strange, as if she was possessed. Later on, she vomited blood and fainted. What did she say to young Furen? Tian Zhu asked. Nothing much, just some words about fate. It doesn't sound wrong. Lian Xiao frowned. Just as they were talking, they saw Xia Qing and Qi Feng rushing in. The two of them were discussing when to leave the capital, but halfway through, the servants of the Wang Fu rushed in and said that Jiang Ruan was in trouble and wanted Xia Qing to quickly go and take a look. Xia Qing originally felt that the people of Jinying Wang Fu were too worried about Jiang Ruan. It was just a small matter, but they still made it sound like it was earth-shattering. As a result, when he came in and saw Jiang Ruan lying on the bed with her eyes tightly closed, he was stunned for a moment. Qi Feng's expression changed and he said, "How did third sister-in-law become like this?" "Oh, my fifth lord." Butler Lin anxiously pulled Xia Qing to the bedside. "Hurry up and take a look. I'm afraid that young madam was angered by someone. She even vomited blood. This is terrible. You're still young, so don't hurt your body." In Lian Xiao's words, Jiang Ruan had not been injured by a knife, but rather, she had been angered by Jiang Dan's words. Although he didn't understand why he was so angry, he didn't have a better explanation. Xia Qing frowned, walked to the bedside, and sat down. She stretched out her hand to check Jiang Ruan's pulse. Everyone looked at him nervously. After a while, Xia Qing put down her hand. Qi Feng asked nervously, "Lao Wu, what happened?" "Third sister-in-law worries too much. She already has a chronic illness. Today, after being provoked, she was depressed and vomited a mouthful of evil blood. The blood clot is stuck in her chest and she can't wake up now." Xia Qing wanted to say something but hesitated. Finally, he shook his head and said, "I will write a prescription first. Butler Lin, find someone to prepare the medicine and let third sister-in-law drink it immediately." Although he said it casually, there was not a trace of relaxation between his brows. Instead, there was a bit of seriousness. This was not an ordinary thing for Xia Qing, who was known as the holy hands of Jinling. Lian Xiao and the others could be ignored, but when Qi Feng saw Xia Qing like this, he clenched his fists. Butler Lin did not dare to delay and immediately sent someone to get the medicine. Xia Qing sat in the room and looked at Jiang Ruan. Her expression was gloomy and uncertain. No one knew what she was thinking. Qi Feng stood by the window and glanced at Jiang Ruan from time to time. A few maids were busy, but Jiang Ruan showed no signs of waking up. About an hour later, the door to the room was suddenly pushed open. A gust of biting cold winter air came in from outside. Xiao Xiao strode in from outside the door, his body still covered with snow that had not melted. He walked to the bedside and looked at Jiang Ruan's tightly closed eyes. He was slightly startled and immediately turned his head to look at Lian Xiao and Bai Ji. He asked coldly, "What happened?" Lian Xiao and Bai Ji looked at each other. Bai Ji had no choice but to repeat the explanation she had given to everyone. Just now, after Wang Ye and Miss separated, Miss met fourth Miss in the palace and spoke a few words with fourth Mississippi Miss, turned around and vomited blood on the carriage, then fainted. Fifth Master Xia said that it caused Mrs. chronic illness. After a pause, Bai Ji continued, "But how could Miss have any chronic illness?" Xiao Xiao was startled. He looked up at Xia Qing and was silent for a moment. He said to Lian Xiao, "Tell me everything that Jiang Dan said to her." His tone was cold and his eyes were dark, containing a deep anger. Lian Xiao's heart trembled. She braced herself and repeated every word that Jiang Dan said to Jiang Ruan. When she was done, she said, "This is all that was said. If I may be so bold as to say, I can't hear anything strange in these words, but in the carriage, Miss seemed to have violated some taboo and had an extremely fearful appearance. This servant has followed Miss for so many years, but ever since we returned to the capital a few years ago, I have never seen Miss so afraid of anything." When Qi Feng heard this, he looked at Lian Xiao inquiringly. However, Xiao Xiao's hands tightened. He seemed to be thinking for a moment and turned to leave. Qi Feng pulled him back. "Third brother, what do you want to do? Whoever started the trouble should untie it. This matter is related to Jiang Dan." "Naturally, I will look for her," Xiao Xiao said. "What can you do if you go now? These few words cannot convict her." Qi Feng glanced at Jiang Ruan. "Do you want to kill her now? This will only bring trouble to third sister-in-law." His words seemed to put himself in Jiang Ruan's shoes. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xiao's eyes turned cold. He looked at him coldly and said, "That is my wife. You don't have to worry about her." Qi Feng's throat was dry and he could not speak. He looked quite embarrassed. It was Xia Qing who stood up as well. Her babyish face was filled with a heaviness that didn't match her age. "Stop arguing. Third brother, third sister-in-law is not angry because of other people's words. Even if it was just an opportunity, what really caused her to be like this is because she was poisoned." Qi Feng loosened his grip on Xiao Xiao's hand and said in disbelief, "Poisoned? Impossible," Xiao Xiao said, "no one can do it in the prince's fu. Everything here was personally managed by housekeeper Lin. It was impossible for the guards in the prince's fu to betray them. Poisoning Jiang Ruan was even more difficult than directly killing her. It was not in the prince's fu." Xia Qing shook her head. "This poison has been in her body for more than 10 years. It seems to have been in her since she was born. I don't know why, but it stopped for several years so that the poison did not spread. But in the end, it has accumulated in her body. Now, someone has used something to induce the poison to come out. As for what the two servant girls said about being angered by someone in the palace, it only caused the poison in Sansaw's body to flow faster." He hesitated for a moment. "There seems to be another purpose, but I cannot think of it." "Lao Wu." Qi Feng did not care about tit for tat with Xiao Xiao and hurriedly said, "Is the prescription you just prescribed effective? Can you cure third sister-in-law's poison?" It was not that he did not have confidence in Xia Qing, but as a fellow apprentice for so many years, Qi Feng had long understood every expression of Xia Qing. As a divine doctor, Xia Qing had a sense of excitement and fanaticism when facing a patient. Her eyes were full of confidence. This was the first time he had seen such an anxious and dignified expression, which really made Qi Feng feel uneasy. Xiao Xiao also stared at Xia Qing, not to mention Bai Ji and Lian Xiao. It seemed that as long as he said that there was no cure, they would immediately cry. Xia Qing swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty and said, "In fact, I have never seen this kind of poison. At present, I am following the prescription of other detoxification. I have to observe for a few more days before I can diagnose it." "How long will it take?" Xiao Xiao asked. "Her life is not a child's play." 2 days. Xia Qing hurriedly said, only 2 days is enough. After 2 days, if her poison is not under control, I think I can do nothing. Xiao Xiao stared at Xia Qing for a long time until Xia Qing felt a little creeped out. Then, he nodded his head and said, you only have 2 days. Xia Qing wiped her sweat. She always knew that her third brother was cold, but she didn't expect him to be so terrible when he was really gloomy. It really made people feel pressured. She simply found a reason to go out and study the prescription. After Xia Qing and Qi Feng left, housekeeper Lin came in and said, I have ordered people to check what young madam ate yesterday. There is no problem in our food. When Lian Xiao and Bai Ji heard this, Lian Xiao hurriedly said, yesterday, I was afraid that Miss would be hungry, so I found some pastries from Baoyu Zhai for Miss, but there should be no problem with those pastries. Bai Ji also nodded. That bag of pastries was taken from the big bag, and the rest were all distributed to the maids in the courtyard. Everyone ate it without a problem, so it is impossible that the pastries were poisoned. To seriously investigate this matter, it was indeed like looking for a needle in a haystack. Xiao Xiao waved his hand. Yi Feng understood his meaning and immediately said, this subordinate will go to Baoyu Zhai now. Such an unforeseen event happened on the first day of marriage. It was really not a good omen. Xiao Xiao looked at Jiang Ruan's slightly pale face with an indecipherable expression. Lian Xiao pushed Bai Ji, and the two went out together. Xiao Xiao walked to Jiang Ruan and sat down. He slowly reached out and pushed the stray hair by her ear to one side. A trace of guilt flashed in his eyes. The top priority was to detoxify Jiang Ruan's poison. Xia Qing's words made him remember that a few years ago, he had also taken Jiang Ruan's pulse. At that time, he discovered that Jiang Ruan's pulse was abnormal. It seemed that there was a problem with her body a long time ago, but his Qi Huang technique was not as refined as Xia Qing's. He thought that now that the poison was gradually receding, as long as she recuperated a little, it would not be a problem. He did not expect that the poison was actually a poisonous snake lying dormant in Jiang Ruan's body, and at this time, someone actually found a mistake. Although Qi Feng and Xia Qing said that Jiang Ruan's poisoning had nothing to do with Jiang Dan, there must be a reason for Jiang Ruan's abnormal fear after Jiang Dan spoke to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Dan was definitely not innocent in this matter. He frowned slightly. Moreover, according to what Xia Qing said, this poison had accumulated in Jiang Ruan's body for many years. In other words, Jiang Ruan was poisoned when she was still a child. Who poisoned her, and who actually did it to a child? He had also heard that Jiang Ruan's early days in the Jiangfu were not smooth sailing, but he did not expect that at a very young age, there would be someone plotting to take her life. As he thought of this, Xiao Xiao's gaze abruptly became a threatening chill. He stroked Jiang Ruan's hair, stood up, and walked out of the room. Jean Eyre and the others were waiting outside with solemn expressions. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes and said faintly, after Wang Fei was born, I want to know everything that happened in the Jiangfu, no matter how big or small. The expressions of Jean Yi and the others turned cold, and they sternly said, yes. In a flash, it was night time. Xiao Xiao sat in the room, approving batch after batch of official documents, but there was not the slightest trace of exhaustion on his face. Housekeeper Lin came a few times to persuade him to rest early, but Xiao Xiao only said that he still had something to do. Anyone with discerning eyes could see that he was just using this as an excuse to watch over Jiang Ruan. However, servants were unable to change their master's mind, so after a few fruitless attempts, they gave up. Lu Zhu pushed open the door and came in, holding a bowl of medicine in her hand. Seeing that Xiao Xiao was still there, she said, Sun Yi, the medicine that divine Dr. Xia ordered to be brewed for Miss is ready. This medicine was brewed by Nubi and Tianzhu, and no one has touched it. Because Jiang Ruan had been poisoned, people in the Fu were now very careful about taking medicine, for fear that she would fall into someone else's trap. As long as the person who lured the poison did not come out early, it would always be dangerous to be around Jiang Ruan. Xiao Xiao looked up and said, you can leave, I will feed her. Lu Zhu did not dare to say anything. She turned around, put the bowl of medicine on the desk, and left the room. After Lu Zhu left, Xiao Xiao picked up the bowl of medicine and walked to the bedside. He helped Jiang Ruan up to lean against his body, blew on the dark brown medicine in the bowl, and slowly fed it to Jiang Ruan. His movements were extremely gentle, for fear of inadvertently hurting Jiang Ruan. If others saw that Xiao Xiao, who had always treated people indifferently, was actually so gentle and considerate, they would be so shocked that their eyeballs would fall out. Unfortunately, Jiang Ruan was in a coma, and the medicine flowed out from the corner of her mouth, splashing onto the bed and wetting Xiao Xiao's chest. He was completely unaware of it, and only stretched out his hand to gently wipe the medicine stains from the corner of Jiang Ruan's mouth. Feeding medicine like this was not a solution. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he picked up the bowl of medicine and took a sip. Then, he pinched Jiang Ruan's chin and slightly raised it. He bent down and pressed his lips against hers, slowly feeding the medicine. The young girl was extremely beautiful, and under her usual gentle appearance, there was always a trace of indifference. At this moment, her lips were soft and carried the bitter fragrance of the medicine. If it was in the past, he would probably have some romantic thoughts. But now, Xiao Xiao had no distracting thoughts in his heart. Looking at Jiang Ruan, he only felt distressed. He bent down and slowly passed the medicine into Jiang Ruan's mouth. Finally, Xiao Xiao put down the empty bowl in his hand. Just as he was about to help her lie down, he suddenly felt the front of his shirt being grabbed by someone. Slightly startled, he lowered his head to look and met Jiang Ruan's wide-open eyes. "You?" There was a moment of embarrassment, followed by surprise. Xiao Xiao held Jiang Ruan's shoulder and said, "You're awake." However, Jiang Ruan did not answer his question. Her eyes were wide open, but her gaze was not calm, and even contained helplessness and panic. Xiao Xiao was startled. This kind of gaze was unfamiliar to Jiang Ruan. As if she did not notice that Xiao Xiao was in front of her, she only tightly held on to Xiao Xiao's clothes and muttered something. Xiao Xiao frowned and moved closer to her. Jiang Ruan's words were clearly transmitted to his ears. She was muttering, "Save me." Xiao Xiao was suddenly startled. Jiang Ruan's body shrank into a ball, but the hand that was holding onto his clothes did not let go in the slightest, as if grasping at the last life-saving straw. In a small voice, she repeated over and over again, "Save me, save me." Ruan, Xiao Xiao softened his voice and gently patted her back. "Don't be afraid, I am Xiao Xiao." Jiang Ruan stared at him with wide eyes, but it seemed as if she was looking at something else through him. Xiao Xiao's outstretched hand stopped, and Jiang Ruan frantically retreated. Her gaze was desolate, as if she had seen something extremely terrible. She angrily asked, "Xianli, how dare you treat me like this?" Xiao Xiao stared at her eyes, and for the first time, he felt helpless. He suddenly shouted, "Yi Feng!" Yi Feng suddenly pushed the door open and came in. "Master, what's wrong?" When he saw Jiang Ruan's appearance, Yi Feng was also quite shocked. When had Jiang Ruan ever had such a distressed expression? She looked as if she was not facing Xiao Xiao, but an old enemy with a blood feud. Before she could recover from the scene in front of her, she only heard Xiao Xiao's cold voice, "Tell Xia Wu to roll in." Xia Qing quickly rushed over. In order to conveniently take care of Jiang Ruan's illness, he simply stayed in Jining Wangfu. Xia Qing had a bad premonition when he was pulled out of the quilt in the middle of the night. When he entered the room and saw Jiang Ruan's abnormal appearance and behavior, he felt a great shock in his heart. Xiao Xiao's face darkened as he asked, "Why did she become like this?" Xia Qing did not dare to be careless and immediately went forward to take Jiang Ruan's pulse. She was startled as if she could not believe it. Then, she carefully took her pulse again before looking at Xiao Xiao and saying, "Third brother, there is nothing wrong with third sister-in-law's body. But her behavior seems to be that of a nightmare. I'm afraid that she originally had some kind of inner demon, and now, due to a freak combination of factors, it has been stimulated." Xia Qing was a little embarrassed. Unknowingly, he had discovered Jiang Ruan's secret. With third sister-in-law's swift and decisive temperament, he did not know how she would treat him after she woke up. However, although he had some misgivings, she was still his sister-in-law after all. Xia Qing still said, "This is third sister-in-law's inner demon. I can only give her a prescription to calm her nerves, but whether it will be useful or not, I really don't know. Third brother, I am a doctor, but I can't treat people's illnesses. Don't make things difficult for me." These words were not false. Xiao Xiao knew that if he continued to ask, Xia Qing would not be able to come up with a good solution, so he said in a low voice, "Get out." Xia Qing touched his head and quickly followed everyone in the room to leave. Only Yi Feng and Xiao Xiao were left in the room. Jiang Ruan was curled up in a corner of the bed. Her expression was mournful, and her eyes were empty and awe-inspiring. When Xiao Xiao first saw her gaze, he was stunned. How could people in this world have such a gaze? Over the years, the brocade guards had lost many lives. Before they died, there were also those who struggled and begged for mercy, but it was not as tragic as the young girl in front of him. That pair of upturned eyes did not have the usual glory and craftiness, only a despair that was engraved into the bones. It was as if being looked at by those eyes, one would feel that there was no more light in the world. Inner demon? Xiao Xiao recalled Xia Qing's words. Jiang Ruan had inner demons? His gaze was ice-cold as he looked at the young girl in front of him. From a long time ago, he felt that Jiang Ruan had a secret that no one knew. She often had some strange actions, but those actions were never useless. She was like a sudden glimmer of light in the great Jin dynasty, strange and mysterious, and he did not know what it meant. Xiao Xiao did not ignore her words just now. Xianli. Many of the things she did seemed to be related to Xianli. He had also sent secret guards to investigate the relationship between Jiang Ruan and Xianli, but they did not find anything. He originally thought that it was just a coincidence, but now it seemed that his guess was correct. Jiang Ruan and Xianli must have had some grudge. Looking at it, it would not be too much to say that it was a blood feud. What did Xianli do to her? She actually asked such a miserable question. Yi Feng, who was watching from the side, could not help but be alarmed. What kind of person was Jiang Ruan normally? She seemed to have no weaknesses. Even when faced with a cunning enemy, she was always calm and collected. Now that she was poisoned and her inner demons were forced out, she actually showed an extremely fragile side. What had she experienced? Xiao Xiao walked over lightly, afraid to disturb her. Jiang Ruan glared at him coldly. Xiao Xiao stretched out his hand, wanting to pull her into his chest to comfort her. He did not expect that just as he moved in front of her, Jiang Ruan would grab his arm and fiercely bite it. "Master!" Yi Feng cried out in alarm. He saw that Jiang Ruan's bite was extremely heavy. Xiao Xiao was wearing light-colored clothes today, and immediately, blood stains densely spread. He only slightly frowned and let her bite. Then, he stretched out his other hand and gently touched her head. His tone was gentle. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." He did not move, and Jiang Ruan did not loosen her bite either. This made Yi Feng feel anxious. After an unknown amount of time, Jiang Ruan seemed to be tired and loosened her bite. Xiao Xiao released his hand from her mouth, but he was not in a hurry to look at his own injury. Instead, he stretched out his hand to help her wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth. Jiang Ruan stared at him blankly. Suddenly, her eyes reddened and big drops of hot tears rolled down the back of Xiao Xiao's hand. Could it be that she had woken up? Xiao Xiao was startled. Jiang Ruan suddenly covered her face. Her voice sounded like she was laughing and crying at the same time. Yi Feng did not dare to breathe loudly. In this quiet night, her cries were extremely clear. She removed her hand. The expression on her bright and beautiful face was indecipherable. It seemed to be a smile of despair, but it also seemed to be a heart-wrenching grief. She questioned, "Father, this is how you sent me to the Yellow Springs. It turns out that you were in cahoots with them to deceive me. It turns out that you wanted my life to be used as a stepping stone for Jiang Su Su." It turns out that from the beginning, you wanted me to fulfill your meritorious service and official career. You are so ruthless. Wasn't Jiang Su already dead? Why was she brought up again? Yi Feng was puzzled. Then what was the matter with Jiang Quan's meritorious service and official career? Jiang Ruan's words caused Yi Feng to be completely confused. Jiang Ruan shook her head and said, I am not a demoness who brings calamity to the country. I did not kill the emperor. Be good. Ruan, don't think about it. Xiao Xiao pressed her into his embrace. His pitch-black eyes did not reveal any emotion, but his tone was very gentle and comforting. Jiang Ruan tugged on his sleeve and suddenly said, Save my older brother. Save him. They want to kill him. Save my older brother. Xiao Xiao closed his eyes. When he raised them again, his gaze was like ice. In a cold voice, he said, Yi Feng, immediately go to the minister's Fu and invite Jiang Xing over. Chapter 189. By the time Jiang Xing hurried to Jining Wangfu, his expression could no longer be described as ugly. In the middle of the night, someone had suddenly sneaked into his room. If he had not shown his identity in time, he would have been treated as an assassin. The person was in a hurry and only said that something had happened to Jiang Ruan and that he had to hurry to the Wangfu. Jiang Xing became anxious when he heard this and rushed to Jining Wangfu on horseback. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became. His sister had just married into the Wangfu for a day and now something had happened. The person who had come spoke vaguely and he did not know what it was. But Jiang Xing was also clear that if it was not an important matter, Xiao Xiao would not have personally sent someone to inform him. Sure enough, when he arrived at Jining Wangfu and entered the main courtyard, he saw Bai Ji, Lian Xiao and the others with grave expressions. Jiang Xing's heart sank and he strode in. At a glance, he saw Jiang Ruan crying in Xiao Xiao's arms. Ever since Jiang Ruan had been picked up from the rural residence, she had almost never cried so uncontrollably. Even in front of Jiang Xing, she was always calm and collected. Jiang Xing knew that his sister's temperament had been honed over the years to become extremely tenacious. When had he ever seen her show such an expression? For a moment, he was somewhat absent-minded. The young girl in front of him overlapped with the gentle and weak little girl from many years ago when Zhao Mei was still around. However, after only a moment of absent-mindedness, Jiang Xing recovered and walked to Xiao Xiao in 2 or 3 steps. He said angrily, Ruan, what's wrong? Did he bully you? Jiang Ruan was crying so hard that Jiang Xing's heart tightened. There was probably no one in this world who could make her cry like this, but if it was Xiao Xiao. Jiang Xing frowned coldly. Yi Feng was somewhat nervous. It seemed that if Jiang Ruan answered well, Jiang Xing would immediately fight with Xiao Xiao here and now. She was poisoned. Xiao Xiao said lightly, now, she is troubled by her inner demons and her mind is not clear. I called you here because there is something I want to ask you. Before the Xia family conspired to harm you, did you fall into another trap? What poisoned? What are you talking about? Jiang Xing frowned, not understanding what Xiao Xiao was talking about. When he saw that Jiang Ruan did not seem to notice his arrival, he faintly felt that something was wrong. He took a step forward and bent down to get closer to Jiang Ruan. Ruan? However, Jiang Ruan was completely oblivious to it. Her eyes were as empty as a deep and serene pool. Her words were clear, like a bolt from the blue exploding in Jiang Xing's ears. She said, brother, don't die. Don't leave me alone. Jiang Xing froze in place. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. Now you understand why I called you over. What exactly is going on? Jiang Xing was not a fool. Seeing Jiang Ruan's abnormal state, he understood a little. He scrutinized Jiang Ruan from head to toe and did not see any other injuries on her body. Only then did his heart calm down slightly. He looked at Xiao Xiao with an unfriendly gaze. What happened to Ruan? How come you don't even know me? She looks like she's been possessed. Recalling what Xiao Xiao had just said, Jiang Xing was shocked. You mean she's been poisoned? Yes. Xiao Xiao looked at Jiang Ruan in his arms. She had been in this state of panic for too long, and the words she spat out from time to time contained endless secrets. Every one of them made one's heart jump. Even for him, there were many areas that he did not understand. Jiang Xing was Jiang Ruan's biological brother. Originally, he thought that Jiang Xing would at least know a thing or two about many things. But now, it seemed that these two siblings did not hide anything from each other. Jiang Ruan had always sealed herself in a narrow space that no one could enter. This was because the secret she was guarding seemed to be a huge conspiracy. How could she be poisoned? Jiang Xing grabbed Xiao Xiao's lapel. Perhaps he was afraid of hurting Jiang Ruan, so his grip was still much lighter. He lowered his voice, but the rims of his eyes were somewhat red. His tone was full of anger. Xiao Xiao, she has only been married for a day, and you let her be poisoned right under your nose? This is how you take care of her. If I had known that this Wang Fu was such a dangerous place, I would have raised her in the Fu for the rest of her life rather than let her marry you. He had always been protective of his own people, but Yi Feng, who was listening at the side, wanted to cry out for his master. He said, "Young Master Jiu, your words are not appropriate. Young madam, this poison was not poisoned in our Fu. If we look into it, the poison has been in her body since she was born and it has been accumulating in her body since she was young. The source of the poison is not in the Wang Fu. If you want to blame your master, isn't it too unreasonable?" The embroidered uniform guards treated Xiao Xiao with great respect, but they did not pay much attention to other people. Yi Feng spoke without the slightest bit of politeness. Jiang Xing stared blankly at him and asked, "Born with the poison? So let me ask you." Xiao Xiao looked at him coldly. "In the Jiang Fu, there was someone who was unfavorable to you. Who was it?" Jiang Xing was slightly startled, and then he laughed coldly. He had always treated people in an amiable and upright manner. It was very rare to see such a gloomy expression. He said, "In the Jiang Fu, our Wan and I are thorns in everyone's eyes. If you want to ask me who was unfavorable to us, there are too many. Our Wan has been continuously humiliated since she was born. At that time, with mother and my protection, she could at least pass her days in peace. Today, if you had not mentioned it, I would not have known that she had been poisoned long before that." Jiang Xing clenched his fists. "If I knew who that person was, I would definitely tear his body into 10,000 pieces." "My late wife was also poisoned," Xiao Xiao said lightly. "Because of this, she passed away. But you did not seem to have been poisoned." Xiao Xiao glanced at Jiang Ruan, who was in his arms. "Only you know the family affairs of the Jiang Fu. You will be the one to unravel them. After we find that person, even if you don't make a move, I will not let him have an easy time." His words were light and breezy, but the room suddenly became colder. His last few words seemed to carry a faint murderous intent that engulfed the sky and covered the earth. Without any hesitation, this beautiful and elegant youth, in the next moment, would transform into a bloodthirsty and merciless Azura. Jiang Xing fixed his gaze on him, and Xiao Xiao calmly met his gaze. After a moment, Jiang Xing said in a low voice, "If you ask who my greatest enemy is, naturally, it is Xia Yan and her family. At that time, she wanted to be the mistress of the household. She was clearly just a concubine, but she made things difficult for mother at every turn. She even pretended to be magnanimous, and Jiang Quan always protected her." Jiang Xing's expression was as if he had swallowed a fly. Whenever he thought of those days, the humiliation that Xia Yan's pretentiousness had brought to the three of them, mother and son, he felt nauseous from the bottom of his heart. Now, he was not even willing to let Jiang Quan call him father. It could be seen that he no longer had a shred of affection for the minister's Fu. Xia Yan is already dead, but she was induced by someone to expel the poison in her body. The culprit was not Xia Yan. Xiao Xiao said, I will investigate this matter thoroughly. Now. He looked at Jiang Ruan, who was in his arms. Come and see her. He let go of her. Jiang Ruan, who had been coaxed by him earlier, had somewhat calmed down. At least, she did not question him hysterically. However, she still had an extremely frightened and mournful appearance, as if she had experienced something extremely hopeless. As soon as Xiao Xiao stepped aside, Jiang Xing stepped forward and embraced Jiang Ruan. Both of Jiang Ruan's eyes were already red and swollen. Although Jiang Xing had previously answered Xiao Xiao's question, upon seeing the scene, his heart was still full of doubts. At once, he hurriedly asked, how did our Ruan become like this? By accident, her heart's demon has now been born. Xiao Xiao's voice did not contain any emotion, but one could feel the faint anger contained in his calm words. He stood up and glanced at Jiang Ruan. This is her heart's demon. Jiang Xing, she is immersed in this kind of fear every day. I am unable to understand it, and neither do you. However, there are some things that I think you should know. He lowered his eyes, and his long eyelashes seemed to tremble slightly. His tone was without the slightest ripple. Your younger sister, Hong and Junju, is not as fearless as she appears on the surface. She is in fear every day, it's just that neither you nor I are aware of it. After saying this, he pushed open the door and walked out, leaving Jiang Xing alone in his original spot. After being stunned for a moment, Jiang Xing seemed to understand, and he lowered his head to look at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan was completely unaware that even though Jiang Xing was by her side, her gaze seemed to pass through him, as if she was looking at something else. Jiang Xing noticed that her little finger was deeply curled up in her palm, and the rims of Jiang Xing's eyes immediately reddened. When Jiang Ruan was young, she was very timid, but whenever she was extremely afraid, she would always unconsciously make this small gesture. Later, when Jiang Ruan returned from the rural residence, she was smart, calm, bold, and efficient. She seemed to have nothing to fear, and he had never seen her make this gesture again. He had originally thought that she no longer had anything to fear, and that she no longer retained this habit. But now that he had seen her today, it turned out that she had always been that little girl. How could he have allowed his younger sister to fall into such a situation? Xiao Xiao's words were like a heavy hammer that heavily pounded on his heart. Jiang Ruan had been immersed in anxiety and fear day and night, but he actually did not know. He actually did not know. Jiang Xing clenched his teeth and fiercely punched the head of the bed. The vase on the head of the bed shattered, and blood slowly overflowed from the gaps between his fingers. Jiang Ruan's body trembled, and Jiang Xing looked at her. She grabbed Jiang Xing's hand and muttered, bleeding, eldest brother is bleeding, eldest brother is dead. Eldest brother died on the battlefield, eldest brother didn't die on the battlefield, he was murdered. Eldest brother. Her originally calm emotions suddenly became incessantly agitated, and a crazed look appeared in her eyes. However, all she kept saying was Jiang Xing's name. Although Jiang Xing did not understand what she was saying, he could not help but feel a lump in his throat. He could not help but pull Jiang Ruan into his arms, as if he was comforting his younger sister many years ago. He softly said, Aru, eldest brother is fine, eldest brother will not abandon you, don't be afraid. I won't go anywhere. In the silence of the night, the movements of the siblings could not be ignored, and the people outside could hear them clearly. Lu Zhu covered her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, I never knew that Mrs. Hart was so bitter. Ever since she had followed Jiang Ruan to the rural residence, Jiang Ruan had never shown her bitter side. She had her own thoughts, but among all her emotions, the only one that did not include weakness. Jean Eyre patted her shoulder. Young madam has a strong temperament, she will get better. Tian Zhu remained motionless, and only quietly looked at the room. She had once admired the tenacity and methods of the woman in the room, and had wanted to strive to become as strong as her. Now, suddenly seeing Jiang Ruan like this, Tianzhu was also puzzled. She must have suffered a lot, Steward Lin suddenly said. It was rare for everyone to see him so serious, and they all turned their heads to look at him. Steward Lin stood outside the room, and at this moment, a peculiar emotion seemed to float through his shrewd eyes. In an instant, he seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life and sorrow. He said, "If one's wisdom and methods are different from ordinary people, it does not mean that one is a heavenly genius. However, if one is only able to endure when one is young, then one will know that one cannot endure when ordinary people cannot." Her methods are so impressive, and she has never been afraid of anything. This must be because, a long time ago, she had already experienced a moment of extreme despair. A heartless person's heart must have been hurt before. Had her heart been hurt before? Everyone simultaneously looked at the silhouette under the light of the lamp in the room. The woman seemed to be extremely upset, and under the shadow of the swaying lamp, her shoulders were strangely weak. It really made one's heart feel unbearable. Originally, they had thought that the woman was cold and aloof, but it turned out that her heart was in so much pain. For a moment, everyone's heart felt a little more pain towards this future female master of the Wang Fu. Where did master go? Jean San looked around, but no one knew when Xiao Xiao had left the room, but he had already disappeared. Jean Si was stunned. Oh no, could master have impulsively gone to look for Jiang Dan? Everyone looked at each other. It was the end of the year, and even the palace was extraordinarily lively. Everywhere, people began to buy things for the new year. In addition, the weather these few days was very good. Even if it was snowing lightly, the sun was always lovely. The emperor was very pleased, and the concubines in the palace were all happy. When the master was happy, the servants naturally benefited as well. For a moment, the gloomy atmosphere in the palace was swept away, and it became cheerful and lively. In a corner of the palace, Mingyu was serving the young man breakfast. Xian Pei stood up. This young man was now highly regarded by the emperor, and even Xian Li and Xian Hua were not much stronger than him. Although the court officials felt that it was a little risky to bet on the 13th prince, who had no background, but looking at the emperor's attitude, they could not make up their minds. The 13th prince, Xian Pei, was well versed in the 4 books and 5 classics, and was a good writer on policy. Even the usually strict grand tutor, Lu Min, was full of praises for him. He was not arrogant because of the emperor's favor. Even though he was still young, he had a good understanding of the affairs of the court. Every time the emperor tested him on the affairs of the court, Xian Pei could come up with a few good ideas. Now that the sky was just starting to brighten, he had already ordered people to light the lamps. After casually eating a few mouthfuls of breakfast, he washed up and walked to the study table by himself. There was a thick stack of classics on the table. He was always like this, getting up when the rooster crowed. Everyone could only see the glory in front of him, but they could not see the hard work this young man had done in private. He never talked about this with anyone, but Mingyu was secretly shocked. The longer she stayed by Xian Pei's side, the more she felt that this delicate and beautiful young man was really incredible. At such a young age, he knew how to hide his strength and bide his time. His self-control was amazing, and he almost did not need anyone to remind him. He could always accurately know what he wanted to do and work hard for it. Even the emperor's good impression of him was within Xian Pei's step-by-step plan. For example, at this moment, he was studying hard just to be able to answer the emperor's new questions smoothly. Xian Pei had already sat at the table, and Mingyu got up to clean up the remaining bowls and chopsticks. Xiao Tianyos didn't expect that when he was halfway there, he heard Xian Pei's other maidservant, Chaoyang's panicked voice, "Xiao Wangya, why are you here? His Highness is still resting, you." Before he could finish his words, the door was pushed open with a bang. A young man dressed in black stood at the door. His eyes were cold and his expression was faintly haggard. Chao Yang rushed in and looked at Xian Pei in fear. "Your Highness," this servant couldn't stop her, although Xian Pei usually looked very easy to talk to and didn't seem to say anything harsh to his subordinates. Once he was angered, the consequences would always be horrifying. Thus, although Chao Yang was usually all smiles, he treated his master with all his heart. Qiao Yang's words reminded Mingyu of something. She was originally arranged by Xiao Xiao to stay by Xian Pei's side. Speaking of which, Xiao Xiao was his master, and Xian Pei had always used her smoothly. At this moment, she had no intention of stopping Xiao Xiao. Fortunately, Xian Pei was not angry. He only glanced at Xiao Xiao before saying to Mingyu and Qiao Yang, "This prince wants to read some books. Both of you can withdraw." His words implied that he wanted to conceal Xiao Xiao's presence. Mingyu and Qiao Yang hurriedly withdrew and closed the door. After the two of them left, Xian Pei walked unhurriedly to the table and sat down. Today, he was wearing a pineapple green brocade robe with golden edges. Now that the emperor had treated him well, his clothes were no longer ill-fitting. Xian Pei's figure and cloth matched Xian Pei's temperament. Originally, he had been born with a delicate and elegant appearance, but now, he was full of nobility and had a special flavor that was between immaturity and maturity. He leaned against the back of the chair. His voice was still immature and clear, but his tone was full of the airs of an adult. "Wang Ye has barged into my palace so early in the morning. If you have something to say, you might as well say it." As he spoke, he picked up his brush, as if he wanted to practice calligraphy. "What is your relationship with Jiang Ruan?" Xiao Xiao asked coldly. Xian Pei's hand paused, and a large drop of ink dripped from the brush, enshrouding the paper. He put down his brush, concealed the deep meaning in his eyes, and slowly said, "Oh? Why does Xiao Wangye say this?" "First, return to my question." Xiao Xiao did not back down and stared at him. Xian Pei turned his head to look at him, and his gaze slowly fell on Xiao Xiao's arm. Last night, Jiang Ruan had bitten him there. Later, Steward Lin had bandaged the wound for him. The wound on his arm had been bandaged, but the back of his hand had been left with a scratch mark from when Jiang Ruan had gone berserk. As soon as Xian Pei saw the scratch mark clearly, he immediately stood up. His expression changed as he asked, "What did you do to her?" Xiao Xiao's temperament was cold and aloof. Besides the imperial bodyguards, there were almost no other women who could get close to him. Now that he had a wife, Jiang Ruan could be considered to be the one who had the closest relationship with him. For a scratch mark from a woman's fingernails to appear on the back of his hand without rhyme or reason, it was really hard not to think of other things. It was not that Xiao Xiao had never seen Xian Pei before, and he also knew that this immature youth was also an expert in concealing his emotions. But now, his emotions were so exposed, it was really surprising. Fortunately, even so, his attitude towards Xiao Xiao was very clear, and it could be seen that he was very concerned about Jiang Ruan. At least, he would not harm Jiang Ruan. Seeing that Xiao Xiao was still deep in thought and did not speak, Xian Pei became anxious. He took a few steps forward and said, "Quickly answer me, what did you do to her?" When Xiao Xiao heard this, he looked at him thoughtfully. Xian Pei was stared at by those deep eyes that were as black as ink, and he suddenly realized that he had lost his composure. However, it was already too late. Xiao Xiao asked indifferently, "Why are you so concerned?" Xian Pei was momentarily at a loss for words. Then, as if he had thought of something, he immediately said, "Now, Hong and Junzhu can be considered as this prince's half-sister. Since we are brothers, we should naturally take care of each other. If you bully her, it is equivalent to slapping the royal family's face. Today, this prince is not afraid to tell you clearly that if you dare to touch a single hair on her, although this prince is small and insignificant, even if I have to stake this life of mine, I will seek justice for her." Although this youth usually did not show his emotions, when it came to Jiang Ruan's matters, he was unusually persistent. Towards the end, even if his words were somewhat childish, one could still see the determination in them. Those words were not fake, but came from the bottom of his heart. If Xiao Xiao really bullied Jiang Ruan one day, Xian Pei would really disregard everything to find an explanation for her. This kind of relationship was really too unusual. After all, Jiang Ruan was only a Junzhu in name, and she had not been in contact with Xian Pei for a long time. Moreover, He had also investigated and found that Jiang Yuan and Xian Pei's interaction had originated from when she had helped Xian Pei out of trouble from Princess Yi's hands in the palace. It was only a very small matter. How could there be such a deep and profound friendship between them? However, since then, Xian Pei had even helped Jiang Yuan testify at the emperor's trial in the Jinluan Palace. Even the crown prince's appearance and Xia Qing's arrival in the capital had Xian Pei's hand. On the wedding day, Xian Pei's congratulatory gift was so extravagant that it was comparable to the rich dowry of an ordinary official's daughter. No matter how one looked at it, they were not acquaintances. Now, Xian Pei's actions and expression confirmed Xiao Xiao's conjecture. But even so, there were still many things that did not make sense. Clearly, the two of them did not interact much, and last night, Jiang Yuan was still. He lowered his head and looked down at Xian Pei. This youth had not yet grown up, and his delicate appearance made him look very cute. However, his eyes were filled with deep hostility. Xiao Xiao said indifferently, "I did not do anything." "She was poisoned." "Poisoned?" Xian Pei was stunned and hurriedly asked, "Then how is she now? Is she still well?" "Not good." Xiao Xiao's eyes flashed with a trace of deep meaning as he said, "Her entire person has sunk into the devil of her heart," muttering to herself and completely unable to hear the words of others. "What should we do?" Xian Pei was so anxious that he had completely lost his usual maturity and calmness. He only said, "Aren't you Jinying Wang? Why didn't you invite an imperial physician?" "Right, is that Jinling divine hand still in the capital? Why didn't you invite him? This prince will immediately send someone with an invitation card to invite him." "There's no need," Xiao Xiao interrupted his actions. His voice instantly became cold and heavy, "He is in the Fu." It's just that, when our Wan was muttering to herself, she said a name that Ben Wang thought sounded somewhat familiar. Xian Pei was startled. Xiao Xiao slowly said, "She said, Pei Er." Chapter 190. Xian Pei's expression suddenly changed, and he actually took a few steps back in shock. Then, his expression underwent an earth-shattering change, seeming both happy and sad. Xiao Xiao took in his expression and slowly furrowed his brows. After a long while, Xian Pei finally recovered from his entanglement and looked at Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao suddenly had an illusion that the person standing in front of him was not a young boy, but an old man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life. The corners of Xian Pei's lips curved as if he was relieved, but also as if he was smiling bitterly. He looked at Xiao Xiao and slowly said, "I want to see her." Xiao Xiao replied in a low voice, "All right." "Mingyu, Chaoyang." Xian Pei suddenly called out in a loud voice. The two palace maids guarding the door hurried in. Xian Pei restrained his expression, and his tone instantly became extremely cold. "I have to leave the palace. Before I return, do everything you can to protect this matter." "Your Highness, you can't." Hearing this, Chaoyang hurriedly said, "If you are discovered leaving the palace without permission, it will be a big matter. If His Majesty questions you, there are so many people in the palace watching you. You cannot give yourself away. Am I the master or are you the master?" Xian Pei asked in return, "If you can't even handle such a small matter, then you don't deserve to stay by my side." There was no room for discussion. Chaoyang suddenly remembered that the youth in front of him had also watched his personal palace maid, who had followed him for more than 10 years, be beaten to death in front of him without batting an eyelid. He had never been an ordinary youth. At this moment, his tone was so cold that it made Chaoyang shiver. Under such a cruel gaze, he could no longer speak. Xiao Xiao looked on coldly and quietly gave Mingyu a look. When Mingyu saw this, she said to Xian Pei, "Your Highness, rest assured, this servant will take care of things in the palace." Today, Xian Pei had left the palace because of Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao could not just stand by and watch. Moreover, it seemed that Xian Pei and Jiang Yuan had a close relationship. He could not let Xian Pei suffer because of this matter. Xian Pei laughed coldly, grabbed the cloak from the side, and said, "Let's go." In Jinying Wang Fu, Xia Qing had just taken Jiang Ruan's pulse. After drinking the medicine, she always calmed down and fell into a deep sleep. However, the people in the prince's mansion were not in the mood to sleep. Their eyes were all dark. As a physician, Xia Qing naturally racked her brains to come up with a way to detoxify Jiang Ruan's poison. However, even after an entire night's worth of medical expertise, she was still unable to come up with a solution. As for Jiang Xing, there was no need to even mention him. Yesterday, he had accompanied Jiang Ruan for the entire night. Although no one knew what he had heard from Jiang Ruan, everyone could see that his complexion was extremely bleak, as if he had aged 10 years overnight. Qi Feng was sitting at the entrance of the courtyard with Guan Lianghan and Mo Tsong by his side. Guan Lianghan said, "This Jiang family's younger sister usually looks like a lively dragon or a lively tiger, and her scheming ability is beyond the reach of ordinary people. I don't know where she fell into her trap. She was just a little girl at the time. How could someone be so cruel as to lay their hands on a little girl?" He was a gentleman who was magnanimous, so it was extremely disgusting for him to talk about such dirty things in the backyard. Mo Tsong had always looked at Jiang Ruan with some displeasure, but now he was also quite uncomfortable. He said, "Although I used to think that San Sa was a little too strong as a woman, compared to seeing her lying pitifully on the bed now, I would rather she be as arrogant as before." He looked at Qi Feng and said, "Fourth brother, why do you look so distracted?" Qi Feng returned to his senses and smiled bitterly, "I'm fine." Seeing this, Xia Qing patted his shoulder to comfort him, "I know, with your intelligence, you can't see who tricked San Sa, so you must blame yourself. But this matter is not your fault. Maybe fifth brother will be able to concoct the antidote today. Don't be sad." Qi Feng smiled and did not speak. Xia Qing naturally did not know his thoughts. She only looked at Jiang Ruan lying on the bed with a pale face and listened to her heart-wrenching words. Qi Feng only felt shocked once again. He had never liked women to cry. Previously, he had admired Jiang Ruan because of her courage. However, yesterday, when he inadvertently saw Jiang Ruan sad questioning, he also felt pain in his heart. He wanted to comfort her, but could only watch from afar. He hated himself for being powerless and not being able to help at all. Everyone was thinking about their own thoughts when they saw housekeeper Lin hurrying over with Xiao Xiao. Behind Xiao Xiao was another person. Everyone felt a little strange. At this critical juncture, Xiao Xiao still brought people into the Wang Fu. Wasn't he afraid that things would become more chaotic? Looking at the person behind Xiao Xiao, he was dressed in brocade clothes and was not tall. When he got closer, he revealed a delicate and beautiful face, as if he was the young master of a noble family. Inexplicably, he looked somewhat familiar. 13th Prince. Mo Tsong was the first to call out. He looked at Xiao Xiao and then at Xian Pei, saying, "Third brother, why did you call 13th Prince out?" He had a free and unrestrained temperament. The first thing he thought of was not the trouble that Xian Pei might bring by leaving the palace without permission. He was just wondering why Xian Pei was called over when Jiang Ruan had met with a mishap. He could not remember any friendship between Xian Pei and Xiao Xiao. As for Jiang Ruan, it was even more impossible for her to have any relationship with Xian Pei. "You go in." Xiao Xiao said to Xian Pei, "She is inside." Xian Pei glanced at him and said, "Many thanks." His gaze was filled with all sorts of complicated emotions. The people around him were confused, but they also felt that this was not a conversation between an adult man and a young man, but a promise between a man and a man on equal footing. After Xian Pei went in, Guan Lianghan finally could not help but say, "Lao San, what are you doing? Why did you call 13th Prince over? If the Emperor finds out, you will have a lot of trouble. He must come." Xiao Xiao said indifferently, "There are some things that only he understands what is going on." In the room, Bai Ji and Lian Qiao retreated. Xian Pei closed the door. He seemed to be somewhat afraid to approach the bedside and only stood a few steps away from the bed. Jiang Ruan was sleeping peacefully and quietly, her face somewhat pale. As Xian Pei looked at her, he finally took a few steps forward. When he reached the bedside, he suddenly knelt down with a putong sound. The youth's back was perfectly straight, as if he was a truly arrogant aristocrat. However, his eyes were immediately filled with tears. Too many tears had accumulated, and finally, he could not bear it any longer. Hot tears rolled down from his eyes and dripped onto the back of Jiang Ruan's hand. His delicate and beautiful little face was scrunched up. His usually mature face was now filled with childishness. It was as if a child who had always pretended to be strong had seen his mother. His long-term pretense had been removed with a loud bang, leaving only a bellyful of grievances and grievances. Imperial Mother. Xian Pei choked with sobs. Is that you? Imperial Mother, have you returned? He slowly grabbed the hands of the woman on the bed. Those hands seemed to still be as warm as he remembered. He placed them on his cheeks and smiled widely. Do you still remember Pei-er? Pei-er is very happy. Imperial Mother, when will you wake up? It's been so long, I'm so scared. Xian Pei tightly grasped Jiang Ruan's hands. I thought that I was the only one here, and that I was the only one who had returned. I wanted to avenge you, but I didn't know how to do it. I slowly gained a foothold in the palace. Only in this way could I help you. Later, when I saw you, Imperial Mother, I thought that you weren't my Imperial Mother, that you didn't recognize me at all. Pei thought that this was also good. This time, let Pei-er protect you. He suddenly paused. Then, slowly, he began to sob. But, it turns out that you are still my Imperial Mother. If only I could have recognized you earlier. Imperial Mother, in this life, we finally reunited with great difficulty. I don't want to leave you. Imperial Mother, don't leave Pei alone again, okay? The youth's humble plea floated in the air and suddenly dissipated. The arrogant and ruthless youth in the palace also had such a weak moment. If others were to see this, they would not know what to think. However, at this moment, Xian Pei was immersed in his own sorrow and the joy of regaining what he had lost. He could not care about anything else. However, even after Xian Pei's arrival, the situation did not improve. On the contrary, once Jiang Ruan fell asleep, there was no sign of her ever waking up again. Everyone was anxious, and Jiang Xing was so anxious that the rims of his eyes turned red. In the middle of the night, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xia Qing finally walked out with his head drooped. Dejectedly, he said, "Third brother, it's no good. I can't cure this poison." Just as he finished speaking, someone grabbed his collar. It was not Jiang Xing, but Xian Pei. Except for Xiao Xiao, everyone looked at him with some surprise. Xian Pei said word by word, "The so-called divine physician of Jinling turns out to be a quack. This prince is now telling you clearly, if you can't cure him, this prince will report this to Imperial Father. He will tear down your medical center and cut off your head. My great Jin dynasty does not need such an unworthy divine physician." His tone was sinister, like a trapped beast in a desperate situation. Everyone was shocked. Xia Qing was subdued by this youth's ferocious appearance. She even forgot to get angry and just stared blankly at him. Qi Feng frowned. He didn't know why, but he always felt that Xian Pei's eyes were somewhat familiar. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that Xian Pei's angry expression was exactly the same as Jiang Ruan's. Of course, this was impossible. Qi Feng shook his head and cut off his wild imagination. Your 13th Highness, don't push people too far. Embark couldn't stand it anymore and came out to defend Xia Qing. Although my fifth brother is a divine physician, he is not an omnipotent immortal. Otherwise, no one in this world would die. Why do we need so many coffins? I won't allow you to talk about coffins. Shut up. Two voices spoke at the same time. The former was Xian Pei, and he was obviously flustered and exasperated. The latter was Xiao Xiao. He glanced at Embark, and the warning in his eyes made Embark immediately shut up. Jiang Xing forcefully suppressed the emotions in his heart and reluctantly squeezed out a smile. He asked, "Dare I ask Dr. Xia, if Dr. Xia can't cure the poison in my sister's body, is there any other way?" Xia Qing shrank back, and Xian Pei unhappily released his hand. He glanced at Xiao Xiao and met Xiao Xiao's cold gaze. He said with difficulty, "My teacher is Master Hakone Serpent. He is the smartest person in the world. I can't cure this poison, but maybe Master can. If even Master can't cure it, then no one in the world can." He looked at Xiao Xiao and said, "Third brother, why don't you take third sister-in-law to Mount Jia? Master should be out of seclusion by now." Xiao Xiao was startled. He suddenly remembered that the last time he went to Mount Jia to see Master Hakone Serpent, Master had asked him if there was anyone special around him. At that time, he didn't understand what Master Hakone Serpent was referring to, and he didn't say it very clearly. Master Hakone Serpent said that the person had come for revenge, and also to repay his kindness. His fate was entangled with his. Could it be that he was referring to Jiang Ruan? Yes, Master Hakone Serpent also said that he would have a chance to meet that person. Wasn't it now? Jiang Xing saw that Xiao Xiao's eyes were bright and flickering, but he didn't know what he was thinking. He patted his shoulder and said, "Xiao Wangye." Xiao Xiao returned to his senses and glanced at Xia Qing, saying, "I will leave early tomorrow morning. I want to go too." Just as he finished speaking, Xian Pei cried out. Seeing that everyone was looking at him strangely, Xian Pei was startled and immediately tried to cover it up. This prince and Hong and Junzhu can be considered brothers. Since something has happened to her, this prince cannot just stand by and watch. This is, after all, a family matter of the imperial family. This prince has the right to intervene. This was just a Junzhu who had become a Junzhu halfway through her life. She didn't have the slightest bit of blood relations. What kind of brothers were they? Everyone's gaze clearly showed that they didn't believe him. Xiao Xiao coldly said, "No." Xian Pei still wanted to speak, but he heard Xiao Xiao's calm and emotionless voice. "You have been away from the palace for too long. The servants can't stand it. If they are discovered, they will implicate her." Hearing that he would implicate Jiang Ruan, Xian Pei fell silent. He clenched his fists and said after a moment, "Fine, I will return to the palace. But if there is any news, you must send someone to pass me a message." Xiao Xiao did not agree or refuse. This meant that he tacitly agreed. Seeing this, Jiang Xing said, "Then I will go with you. I don't have to stay in the palace. I am Ruan's brother. I can't be at ease leaving her alone. There is an 8-ring formation on Mount Jia. You are not a disciple of our sect and cannot break the formation." Xiao Xiao lightly said, "If you go, it will only delay time." Jiang Xing was speechless. Qi Feng smiled. "Xia Wu and I will accompany third brother. Xia Wu knows medicine and may be able to help Master. I also have some things I want to ask Master. If second brother and seventh brother stay in the capital, they can at least deal with any unusual movements." He said, "We will find a way to let third sister-in-law see Master as soon as possible." Xiao Xiao glanced at Qi Feng and did not refute. He turned and walked into the house. Then what should we do? Mount Jia was covered in snow all year round. The mountains were high and the valleys were deep. The 4 seasons of the year were the scenery of the northern country. From the foot of the mountain to the top, there was a total of 8 broken plum blossom formations. The scenery at the top of the mountain was different from the scenery at the foot of the mountain. Even though it was late winter, the flowers were still blooming. It was as warm as early spring. The green parrot at the entrance of the mountain flapped its wings and screamed. In the courtyard, a gray-robed old man was looking at the chessboard on the stone table, deep in thought. The game of chess had been played in a mess, and there was no order to it. The green parrot chirped happily. The old man shook his head. "Ling Long, there is a guest." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard an anxious voice coming from the entrance of the mountain. Master! Xia Qing ran in, panting. He had been running around for more than 10 days a year without rest. It was too much for him. Xiao Xiao had been the leader of the brocade guards for a long time, so he did not care about such a short journey. Although Qi Feng was also a little reluctant, he also had some martial arts skills. He was the only scholar who did not have the strength to truss a chicken. He knew the art of Qi Huang, but did not know how to strengthen his body. But even so, Xia Qing was an excellent doctor. Adhering to the medical teachings of a doctor, she gritted her teeth and did not complain of tiredness along the way. Mr. Ba Qi smiled. Xiao Wu. Xiao Xiao and Qi Feng appeared behind Xia Qing. Xiao Xiao was still holding Jiang Yuan. Qi Feng saw Mr. Ba Qi and called out to his master. Third sister-in-law is poisoned. Master, please save her. Mr. Ba Qi's gaze fell on Xiao Xiao, who had just arrived. However, it only paused for a moment before it stopped in front of Jiang Yuan, who was in his arms. He sighed slightly and said, "The fate of meeting you has finally come." Xia Qing touched her head. Master, what are you talking about? I really can't detoxify third sister-in-law's poison. Master, what can I do? A human life is at stake. Third sister-in-law has not woken up these days. This disciple thinks that she is not in a good state. Carry her to my room. Mr. Ba Qi said. After Jiang Yuan was carried to the bed in the room, Mr. Ba Qi suddenly said, Xiao Wu, you two go out. I have something to say to Ah Xiao. Master, if there is anything to say, we can talk about it another day. Shouldn't we be saving third sister-in-law now? Qi Feng said anxiously. He had always been calm and wise. He was rarely so anxious. Now that he saw Jiang Yuan's body deteriorating day by day, he lost his composure. Xia Qing pulled him. What nonsense are you talking about? Master is here. He won't let third sister-in-law be in danger. Let's go. Qi Feng was stunned. Although Mr. Ba Qi was usually very gentle to his disciples, in fact, he valued the rules between master and disciple. What he said just now was indeed a little too much. For a moment, he was a little embarrassed. He said, "Sorry, disciple was a little anxious." After looking at Jiang Yuan with some uneasiness, he left with Xia Qing. After Xia Qing and Qi Feng left, Mr. Ba Qi looked at Jiang Yuan on the bed. The cloth bag he took out just now was on the side, but he was not in a hurry to open it. He just said, "Xiao, do you understand now?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Xiao said, "Master, please advise me." Ah Xiao, you are so smart. How can you not understand? Mr. Ba Qi did not look at him. He just said, "What I told you in the beginning, you should understand a little now. Do you still want to make this decision now?" Master, do you think that I should not make such a decision? Xiao Xiao asked. I will always follow your decision. Mr. Ba Qi sighed. Whatever you say, it will be. Good. Xiao Xiao said, Master, please save my wife. Mr. Ba Qi's hand paused. He said lightly, Ah Xiao, I remember telling you that you are not suitable to be a killer. Master said that my blood is not cold enough. Xiao Xiao replied. That's right. Ah Xiao, I knew that you would definitely make this decision. But Ah Xiao, you have to understand. Mr. Ba Qi's face had a touch of pity. Your mortal fate should have ended here. Today, you have made this decision. Your fate can no longer be reversed. Ziwei Star has fallen. Your imperial fate has failed on the verge of success. However, he changed the topic. In this life, you will no longer be my fate. I understand. Master, please save my wife. Xiao Xiao's expression did not change. His tone did not change. Going against the heavens, your fate will be changed. Naturally, something bad will happen to you. Your life may suddenly encounter a disaster. Ah Xiao, do you not regret it? Mr. Ba asked. There is nothing in this world that is particularly valuable to me. Xiao said lightly. I want to protect her. The decision I made today, whether it is fate or disaster, I will never regret it. The young man's appearance was peerless. His eyes were indifferent. His tone seemed to be as cold as usual. There was not even a trace of affection. However, the determination and commitment revealed in it would move even the most stone-hearted person. Mr. Ba was slightly startled. His eyes were a little dazed. It was as if he saw someone else through Xiao. Many years ago, he had also seen a person who used the same tone as Xiao today to say that he would never regret it. But, Mr. Ba sighed. Everyone has their own marriage. He said, okay, I will save her. Her poison is not difficult to cure. It is just a poison refined from a poisonous flower in the southern border. This flower has the effect of bewitching people's hearts. If there is a knot in one's heart or a demon in one's heart, as long as one is slightly unhappy, one will endure the torture in one's heart every day. Every day, one will see the scene that one fears the most in one's life. This poison is harmless to the human body, but it will torture one's heart. In the end, one will die from heart failure. One will be tortured to death by one's own demon in one's heart. Xiao was slightly stunned. He then frowned. It is the southern border. Her demon in her heart is too heavy. Mr. Ba said meaningfully, in fact, now is her most vulnerable time. The answer you want to know can be obtained from her now. If you want to know the secret, no need, master. Xiao interrupted him. Even if I want to know her secret, she must tell me herself. I will not do such a thing, and I disdain it. She won't want to tell you. Mr. Ba asked, if she refuses to tell you this secret for the rest of her life, what will you do? I will accompany her to keep this secret for the rest of my life. Xiao replied. Mr. Ba was stunned. He suddenly said seriously, Xiao, I originally thought that you were not the world's #1 killer. Now I think that your demon in your heart is no less than hers. Her heart demon is a secret, but yours is her. Once a person who was heartless on the surface had love, he would be more persistent than anyone else in the world. Xiao's current situation made Mr. Ba feel that the world was impermanent. Otherwise, why would the things that happened many years ago be repeated now? He thought that he could see through the secrets of heaven, but fate was always impermanent. Otherwise, why would he stay in Mount Jia for the rest of his life? He would be punished for revealing too many secrets of heaven. Even if there were thousands of things in the world that could be foreseen, the only thing that could not be foreseen was love. If she is my demon in my heart, I would rather not see through it for the rest of my life. Xiao said. Chapter 191. Jiang Ruan's head hurt, and her whole body seemed to be as light as a feather, without a trace of strength. She struggled to open her eyes, but did not see the bright sky. A damp and sweet smell filled the tip of her nose, strange yet familiar. She forced herself to recall, and was surprised to find that it was the smell of blood. She moved her body, and slowly climbed up from the ground. This was a dark and damp place, and there were some black worms crawling on the ground. The worms were rotten and disgusting. Something seemed to flash through her mind, so fast that she could not catch it. She touched something hard next to her, and there seemed to be some kind of viscous liquid. She struggled to lift her head. Suddenly, she heard a squeak, and there seemed to be someone talking outside. A ray of strong sunlight shone in, and she could hardly open her eyes. A woman's voice sounded, "Quick, the Empress wants to see it with her own eyes. Move faster, or else the Empress will have to wait for you little hoodlums." Then, a few palace maids walked in. Their expressions were of fear or disgust, and they strangely lit the oil lamps in their hands and walked in until they reached Jiang Ruan's side. However, they seemed to turn a blind eye to Jiang Ruan, and did not even look at her. Instead, they bent down to pick up something from the ground. Jiang Ruan slowly frowned, and looked at them vigilantly. Those people did not seem to notice her at all, as if she did not exist. Jiang Ruan tentatively stood up, and no one stopped her. She thought for a moment, then lowered her head and followed the palace maids out. As soon as she left the room, there was a glaring sunlight outside. It seemed that she had not seen this kind of sunlight for a long time. Turning around, her eyes met with the thing in the palace maid's hands. She was shocked, and unconsciously took 2 steps back, almost falling down. The palace maid was holding a wooden basin, and in the basin lay a monster-like thing. The limbs could not be seen, and only the basin full of blood could be seen. It was probably not the appearance of a person. If it was placed in front of others, they would not be able to tell what it was. But in Jiang Ruan's eyes, it made her heart tremble. That thing was none other than her in her previous life. She was made into a human swine and beaten to death in the wooden basin. The Jiang Ruan in the wooden basin was already dead. It was just an ice-cold corpse, completely devoid of dignity. Jiang Ruan stood on one side, gritting her teeth as she watched the palace maids carry the corpse away. The palace maid in the lead walked in front, and that person was impressively Butterfly. Hadn't Butterfly long ago been banished from the Jiangfu by Jiang Su and sold off to a brothel? How did she become the current palace maid? As Jiang Ruan looked on, a thought suddenly flashed through her mind. In her previous life, she had been killed by a random stick, and thus she had been reborn in the rural residence. No one knew what happened after that. Now, the corpse was still there, and the old friend still looked the same. Could it be that God had opened his eyes and allowed her to see the final ending of her previous life? Butterfly led the palace maids to a garden with a wooden basin in their hands. Jiang Ruan could clearly see that the garden was the garden behind Kunning Palace. Cunning Palace. Jiang Ruan's heart trembled. Could it be? Sure enough, just as she reached the entrance of the garden, she heard a familiar voice saying, "Bengong doesn't care about anything, as long as they are unable to reincarnate, forever and ever. How about it? This humble Taoist will follow your ladyship's instructions and will do his best." Jiang Ruan sneered. Now that no one could see her, she walked inside. Sure enough, the woman sitting on the high seat was dressed in the Empress court attire. She was rich and grand, her face smiling like a flower, and her appearance was as clear and elegant as a fairy. She also had a bit of reserved nobility. The 9-tailed phoenix hairpin on her head shone in the sunlight as it spread its wings, as if it wanted to fly away. Every move she made showed the nobility of a motherly model of the world. It was Jiang Su. At this moment, Jiang Su was reclining on a soft chair. In the huge garden, she was the only one sitting there. The palace maids and eunuchs were standing in a row, their faces slightly frightened. And standing in front of Jiang Su was a man dressed in a Taoist robe. If it wasn't Su Kong Dao Zhang, who else could it be? It turned out that in her previous life, Su Kong Dao Zhang had always been in contact with Jiang Su. Not only did he help her in the matter of cursing her husband and her mother in the rural residence, it seemed that Jiang Su had promised him a lot of benefits. Otherwise, how could a wandering Taoist in the wilderness enter the palace? It was just that she did not know what he was here for. "Your ladyship, this servant has brought the item." Butterfly stepped forward and said cautiously. Jiang Ruan stood at the side and looked on coldly. Jiang Su heard this and laughed softly. Her laughter was extremely beautiful, as if it came from the bottom of her heart. She seemed very carefree, and her pleasant laughter could be heard throughout the entire garden. She was born beautiful, and her laughter was also extremely moving. But at this moment the expressions of everyone in the courtyard did not feel infatuated, but instead revealed a trace of fear. This was because the monster in the wooden basin looked too frightening. If an ordinary person looked at it for too long, they would feel fear in their heart. But Jiang Su stared at the thing in the wooden basin with great satisfaction, as if it could not be more interesting. Everyone was quiet and did not say a word. After a long while, Jiang Su seemed to have laughed enough. She finally straightened her waist and lightly pointed to one side. In any case, Bengong and she are sisters in name. Seeing that we used to live under the same roof, Bengong does not want to be so ruthless. Bengong has always been a soft-hearted person. Let this mother and son be reunited. Her words were said lightly, as if they were weightless. Jiang Ruan was startled. Immediately, she felt as if her blood had almost stopped flowing, and a chill poured down from the top of her head. Directly drenched her whole heart, and half of it went cold. She blankly looked in the direction that Jiang Su had pointed and saw a small body lying on the ground. That body was so familiar that with just one look, tears welled up in her eyes. Jiang Ruan's throat overflowed with difficulty. That sound did not seem like a sound that a human could make. It was filled with despair and hatred that came from the bones. She had originally thought that when she saw Pei being played with in the wooden basin and her body being beaten, she had already felt the greatest despair. Now that she saw Pei's corpse with her own eyes, she realized how much her heart ached. The scenes that had long been sealed in her memory came alive again. It turned out that she had not forgotten all that pain. Jiang Ruan threw herself at Pei's side and wailed loudly. However, her voice could not reach these people's ears. The ending of this life would not change. She was already dead, and Pei was also dead. The small body lying on the ground was covered in a mess of scars, and each one was too horrible to look at. Looking at it made one's heart tremble. Even to a child, they could still be so ruthless. Jiang Ruan felt as if a knife was twisting in her heart. Before Pei died, he must have suffered a great deal of fear. Your ladyship is benevolent. It was that sanctimonious fake Taoist priest, Su Kong Dao Zhang, who flattered. He quickly walked to Jiang Ruan's side and lifted Pei from the ground. His strength was obviously great, and Pei's small body seemed extremely weak in his hands. Jiang Ruan threw herself at him, but her hand only passed by Pei's side. She was completely unable to touch him. Su Kong Dao Zhang grabbed both Pei and Jiang Ruan's bodies and placed them into an agarwood chest. Then, he closed the chest door. Immediately after, a few strong bodyguards walked over and used long nails to nail the chest door shut. The chest door was densely pasted with yellow talismans, and on them were incantations written in blood-red cinnabar, making it difficult for people to read them clearly. Su Kong Dao Zhang sat cross-legged in front of the chest, closed his eyes, and clasped his hands together. He mumbled to himself for a quarter of an hour before he suddenly opened his eyes. He reached for a bowl of chicken blood that had been placed on the table, lowered his head, and took a mouthful. With a "pu" sound, he sprayed it all over the coffin-like chest. Immediately after, he let out a long sigh and ordered people to throw the chest into a dry well in the southwest corner of the garden. After doing all this, Su Kong Dao Zhang walked in front of Jiang Su and said as if he was asking for credit, replying to your ladyship, this humble Taoist has already completed the ritual. That Demoness and the Malefic Star have been sealed in the 9 stars formation and will forever be suppressed in this dry well, unable to reincarnate or free themselves. They will never be able to come out and cause trouble again. Very good. Jiang Su smiled with satisfaction. Since Bengong is the empress of the Great Jin dynasty, Bengong must bear the responsibility of the Great Jin dynasty. Even if we are siblings, we absolutely cannot ruin the entire Great Jin dynasty's rivers and mountains for the sake of personal feelings. Since they are Demoness and Malefic Star, they naturally cannot be allowed to come out and cause trouble. Taoist priest has worked hard in performing the ritual. Later, Bengong will report this matter to His Majesty and remember your merit. Su Kong Dao Zhang was naturally overjoyed and said, many thanks for your ladyship's favor. While the people on this side were talking cheerfully, Jiang Ruan's whole body was alternating between cold and hot. Jiang Su actually hated her to such an extent that she would not let her off even in death. Instead, she had allowed Su Kong Dao Zhang to perform the ritual. Unexpectedly, she wanted her soul to be trapped here for life and death, to suffer eternal torment. If it were not for the fact that Su Kong Dao Zhang was only a fake Taoist priest with an undeserved reputation, wouldn't everything be as she wished? It was said that a woman's heart was the most vicious, but Jiang Su-su's attitude was really too much. Jiang Ruan looked at the pitch-black dry well. It turned out that in her previous life, her and Pei Er's final destination was this dry well that was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Together with those rotten leaves, they were buried deep inside. She somewhat wanted to cry, but also somewhat wanted to laugh. It turned out that in her previous life, she had died in such a sorry state. Unexpectedly, when she finally landed on the ground, she also had no dignity at all. Then, she felt her vision blur. Unexpectedly, before she could move, the scene in front of her changed by itself. The door was very familiar. If it was not the minister's Fu, where else could it be? Jiang Quan was sitting in the study. Jiang Su-su was dressed in luxurious clothes and her expression revealed a faint arrogance. However, Jiang Quan did not look very happy and said, "You actually acted so recklessly. I have already told you not to act blindly without thinking. Since she is in front to clear the way for you, why do you need to make such an unnecessary move? If others were to gossip, wouldn't all of my painstaking efforts be in vain?" Xia Yan's eyes were beautiful, her movements dignified and gentle. She smiled and comforted him, "Master, don't be angry. Open your heart and see what Su-su has to say. This child is not without propriety. From young until now, don't you know what kind of person she is?" Jiang Su-su quickly concealed the trace of impatience in her eyes. In a respectful and naive tone, she said, "Father, I know I was wrong. In the future, I will not make such a mistake again. I originally only wanted to scare her, but I did not expect that my subordinates would act on their own initiative and cause me to end up like this. Father, don't be angry with me. It is not worth harming your own health because of anger. I will not dare to do it again in the future." Her appearance was extremely submissive, and the anger on Jiang Quan's face gradually dissipated. He only sighed deeply and said, "In this matter, I originally only wanted to use her to pave the way for you. The Jiang family can place righteousness before family, and you can also gain a good reputation outside. Your position as empress will also be more stable, and you will be able to win the hearts of the people. Now, she has been secretly taken out by you. Fortunately, no one outside has found out, and they will only say that she committed suicide to escape punishment. Su-su, if you want to do things, you must be more straightforward. Don't leave any evidence for others to use against you." His tone was completely that of a loving father, and every word and sentence was filled with concern for Jiang Su-su. Jiang Su-su smiled slightly, "Father, please be at ease. Su-su knows how to prepare everything. Nothing could be better over there." Jiang Quan heaved a long sigh of relief, as if a stone had been lifted from his heart. Jiang Ruan stood quietly to the side and watched. There was no longer any hatred in her eyes, only a bone-chilling coldness. That kind of coldness was something that even the coldest ice in the cold winter could not compare to. Her gaze was empty, and her crimson clothes were like a ball of fire that had burst forth from her soul, wanting to incinerate and starve everyone who approached her until not even their bones remained. So this was the truth of her past life. After her father, Jiang Quan, had learned of her death and that she had been privately executed by Jiang Su-su, not only did he not cry out for injustice, nor did he complain about the grievances he had suffered throughout his life. On the contrary, he had been thinking of Jiang Su-su from the inside out. He was afraid that Jiang Su-su would leave any evidence that could be used against her, which would endanger her position as empress. As for this daughter of his, he had only lightly said, "Do it more straightforwardly." Jiang Quan had treated her as a stepping stone to pave the way for Jiang Su-su's position as empress, and he had done it as if it was only right and proper. However, he had forgotten that she was also the Jiang family's daughter. One could be discarded like a pair of worn-out shoes, while the other could be cherished like a pearl. At least at this moment, Jiang Ruan did not have the slightest bit of affection for Jiang Quan. If she could, she was willing to use all the ugly and painful methods to torture him, and to view him as a true enemy. Jiang Su-su seemed to have suddenly thought of something and said, Jiang Dan is becoming more and more insensible. That husband of hers is merely working for His Majesty outside, but now he is also relying on his reputation as a first-grade honorary title. From what I see, he doesn't even put me in his eyes. Jiang Ruan was stunned. Jiang Dan's husband was actually working for Xianli. Jiang Dan had been promoted to a first-grade honorary title. Jiang Quan shook his head. No matter how great she is, can she surpass you? Su Su, you must remember, whether it is in the minister's Fu or the imperial palace, or even in this great Jin dynasty, she cannot be compared to you. My minister's Fu's daughter has always been only pleasing to you. That husband of hers is now heavily relied upon by His Majesty, and is also a great help to you in the imperial palace. Don't throw a tantrum like a child, you must remember to get along well with her. I know. Jiang Su Su pouted in dissatisfaction. Jiang Ruan, who was standing to one side, suddenly understood. The things that she had not understood in her previous and current lives became clear at this moment. With Jiang Dan's temperament, how could she be willing to be a pawn of the Jiang Fu and pave the way for Jiang Su Su? It turned out that her merchant husband had long been working for Xianli. As expected, Jiang Dan also had her own methods. After her death, she had actually obtained an honorary title through that husband. In the end, she was the only one who had been sacrificed in her previous life. She looked at this ironic scene in front of her, and only felt a salty and fishy taste overflow in her mouth. Immediately after, the scene in front of her changed again. This time, it was a magnificent palace, a place that she was unfamiliar with. And the person sitting at the edge of the bed, a man dressed in bright yellow, could not be more familiar. That was her lover in her previous life, and her mortal enemy in this life, Xianli. His original gentle and smooth appearance had been covered up by the calm and reserved characteristic of an emperor. The Xianli wearing the imperial robe was like a completely different person from the one in Jiang Ruan's memory. He always had a slight smile on his face, and his smile was like a spring breeze. Even if it was only a mask, it was still pleasing to the eye. But now, Xianli's brows were tightly furrowed, and he looked a lot more haggard. There was no longer any trace of his former triumphant appearance. Qin Gonggang, Xianli said to the little eunuch in front of him, "We cannot sleep today. Does your majesty want to go to her majesty's place? Perhaps she can calm your majesty's mood with her gentle and soothing words," Qin Gonggang said. "No need." Xianli waved his hand, "It's the same wherever we go. We still have nightmares every day, and those nightmares disturb us so much that we cannot sleep peacefully. Every time we wake up from the dream, we always feel that. We always feel that someone is watching us." Jiang Ruan stood by the dragon bed and looked at Xianli, who was in a slightly sorry state. She sneered silently. So there were times when he could not sleep peacefully. He had patiently planned and sent her into the palace as an excellent chess piece. Now that the great task had been accomplished, this high and lofty emperor's position had been enjoyed by him alone. So it turned out that he could not sleep at night? In the end, what was the reason for this? Was it because one would always receive retribution for doing something wrong? In his nightmares, did she turn into a malicious spirit and come to claim his life? "Your Majesty is too tired for the affairs of the state," Qin Gonggang said. "Only after sitting on this position will one feel tired, just like how we feel that all the women in the imperial harem are boring. They can't even compare to Jiang Ruan at that time." He seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of regret appeared on his face. "It's just a pity. If she didn't have such an identity, we would have liked her a little at that time." "You love me?" Jiang Ruan could not help but laugh when she heard these words, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She knew that Xianli could not possibly hear it, but she still said coldly, "You only love a fool who worships you as a deity, who is always obedient to you, and who asks nothing of you. At that time, I was too stupid to be biased towards you. Now that you are saying these words, are you lying to me or to you? Xianli, you only love all the victims in this world who have sacrificed themselves for your throne. You have sacrificed them, yet you still pretend to comfort them. How hypocritical." The silhouette in the bright yellow dragon chamber gradually faded away, and in front of her became a blur. Jiang Ruan walked in the white fog, as if she had walked into a huge labyrinth. She could only hear the sounds of thousands of soldiers and horses fighting, and the loud sound of the city gates being smashed open. The sound of swords clashing could be heard everywhere, and someone shouted, "Not good, not good, the embroidered uniform guards have entered the pass." Embroidered uniform guards? This name was so familiar, as if she had heard it somewhere before. Jiang Ruan walked forward in a daze. She saw that the throne room was in chaos, and blood flowed like a river. From time to time, black-armored guards with swords and sabers walked through the hall. Outside, the imperial guards were either dead or injured, and in the hall, a man and a woman in bright yellow had both fallen at the bottom of the 9 steps. They were in the same sorry state as she had been in the past, but at that time, she was still alive. And they were already dead. The black-clothed youth stood quietly in front of the dragon throne. His appearance was beautiful beyond compare, but his eyes were as cold as ice. Although there was an air of elegance and nobility that was engraved into his bones, it was forcibly restrained by that coldness. At the side, an imperial guard said, "Unjustifiable dog thief, you actually dare to spout nonsense. You don't even know who is the real traitor. General Guan has also sent that old dog thief Jiang Quan to the Western Paradise, master." The youth turned around and said indifferently, "Let's go." Xian Li and Jiang Su, one of them plotted to obtain the most supreme power under the heavens. One of them, from the beginning, wanted to sit on the position of the mother of the world, but after her great undertaking was accomplished, her life was taken away by someone else. Even Jiang Quan himself had ended up with his head separated from his body. This youth was clearly the future emperor who had appeared midway. Jiang Ruan's heart only felt pleased. When she looked at the youth again, she felt her heart beating extremely fast. She felt as if she had seen this youth somewhere before, but she really could not remember. She wanted to figure out what exactly was going on, so she followed behind the youth and kept walking forward. When they reached the imperial garden, they saw a middle-aged man with grizzled hair coming forward and saying, "Young master, Grand Tutor Lu discovered that there was something in the dry well." He fished out a chest from the well, and there were 2 corpses inside. After asking around, it was the eldest daughter of the Jiang family's first wife. She was the one who was slandered by her own father as a demoness who brought disaster to the country. He shook his head and said, "Ai, how can there be such a cruel father in this world?" The youth and Jiang Ruan's gazes simultaneously looked towards the ground. The 2 corpses, one big and one small, had already decomposed beyond recognition. However, it was vaguely visible that the Daron's limbs were already mutilated. It was clear that he had suffered a great injustice before dying. Jiang Ruan looked indifferently at her own corpse. A young man dressed in purple walked over. He was handsome, but he kept a small mustache around his lips, appearing very comical. Looking at the corpse, he sighed and said, "From the same root, why torment each other so urgently?" This woman was originally a beauty in the palace, but this child was raised by His 13th Highness. For both mother and child to end up like this, it really makes one sigh. As he said this, he bent down and took off his own clothes to cover the corpse. Looking at the youth in black, he said, "Third brother, how do you think we should deal with the corpse? Since she is an imperial concubine, she should rightfully enter the imperial tomb. Find an opportunity to properly bury her." The youth lowered his eyes and said indifferently, "At the same time, announce to the world the truth about the demoness who brought disaster to the country." As if struck by lightning, Jiang Ruan stared fixedly at the cold and handsome youth. She had originally thought that she would never be able to redress her grievances in this life, but at the last moment, there was light at the end of the tunnel. This youth's words were the last trace of warmth that she had received in this cruel life, and the only longing that she had felt when she was at the end of her road. She suddenly widened her eyes and called out, "Xiao Xiao." Chapter 192. Xiao Xiao. Jiang Ruan's eyes widened as she abruptly awoke from the bed. The oil lamp was as dark as ink, and the charcoal burning in the room seemed especially warm in the winter. A concerned voice called out, "You're awake." Jiang Ruan raised her eyes to look. The cold and handsome youth from her dream was currently sitting by the bed. He had probably just been awakened by her. His gaze was slightly nervous, but his eyes were cold and clear, as if they were a tranquil and deep pool that could draw people in uncontrollably. "You." Jiang Ruan was absent-minded. That tragic past was nothing more than a dream, as if it had been a dream of 3 lifetimes. She had seen all kinds of people's fates, and now that she saw Xiao Xiao, she felt as if it was a lifetime ago. Seeing that Jiang Ruan was just sitting on the bed in a daze, Xiao Xiao was slightly startled. He stood up to pour her a glass of water. "Do you feel thirsty? You've been unconscious for more than 10 days, drink some water." Just as he was about to get up, Jiang Ruan grabbed his hand. Xiao Xiao turned around, raised his eyebrows, and sat down beside Jiang Ruan. "What's wrong?" His voice was soft and reassuring, making people feel a trace of reality after experiencing the tragedy of the dream. Jiang Ruan stretched out her hand as if she was somewhat timid. Xiao Xiao frowned. She touched Xiao Xiao's collar, as if to confirm whether this person really existed. After her hand paused at the collar, Jiang Ruan suddenly wrapped her hands around Xiao Xiao's neck, threw herself forward, and hugged him tightly. Even now, Jiang Ruan's actions were shocking. Xiao Xiao was slightly stunned, and after a moment, he looked at Jiang Ruan with some hesitation. Jiang Ruan's head was buried in his neck, and her hands were tightly wrapped around his neck. He thought for a moment, then stretched out his hand and gently patted Jiang Ruan's back, softly saying, "Ruan?" "Xiao Xiao." Jiang Ruan's voice was somewhat strange, as if she was forcefully suppressing some kind of emotion, and her words were also somewhat strange. "I didn't understand at first, I didn't understand why it was you, but now I understand." Her voice slowly lowered, almost inaudible. "So, you appeared a long time ago. There was no such thing as fate in this world." In her previous life, she and Xiao Xiao did not seem to have any relationship, but in this life, they were somewhat entangled. At first, she thought it was just a coincidence, until the dream seemed like a dream, and everything from the past reappeared before her eyes. Some things suddenly became clear in his mind. In her previous life, it was Xiao Xiao who had avenged her. Was it because of this that she had to repay him in this life? Does karma exist in this world? Did I? No? Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. His long eyelashes hung down, concealing the emotions in his eyes. However, his actions were gentle, and he only lightly patted Jiang Ruan's back. Even his silence made one feel at ease. After a while, he felt a warm liquid flowing down the side of his neck. She was actually crying. Xiao Xiao's heart skipped a beat, and he slowly supported Jiang Ruan's shoulders. With one hand, he lifted her chin. Her face, which had always been bright and beautiful with a smile, was now streaked with tears. A large teardrop hung on her chin, sparkling and translucent, on the verge of falling, just like her current expression. "You?" Xiao Xiao was stunned by her expression. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the woman in front of him suddenly pounce forward. He felt warmth on his lips, and a warm and soft touch came from his lips. His body stiffened and Xiao Xiao's elegant eyebrows knitted together. Jiang Ruan's actions today were extremely unusual. Putting aside the fact that she wouldn't normally do something like this, it was very strange for her to be so passionate about it. He wanted to pull Jiang Ruan away, but the woman hugged him even tighter. Her slender arms tightly wrapped around him, as if she was afraid that he would run away. Xiao Xiao's heart inexplicably softened. The woman seemed to have been encouraged. Her lips never left his for a moment, and she even acted more boldly. Xiao Xiao's fair and handsome face immediately blushed. A beauty throwing herself into his arms, and it was the woman he admired. Even a normal man would not be indifferent. No matter how cold Xiao Xiao usually did things, no matter how gentle he treated her, a man's desire to plunder and conquer had always been there. He was originally a strong and overbearing man. It was just that he usually hid it under his indifferent appearance and was overlooked by others. At this moment, his arms tightened, and he took advantage of the situation to pull her into his embrace. With one hand, he clasped the back of the woman's head and fiercely kissed her. Lips and tongues met. Unlike the gentle and cold appearance, the kiss was overbearing and passionate, almost swallowing people. However, when the passion was strong, all the suppressed emotions were released at the same time. It seemed to be gentle and affectionate, but also seemed to be lingering to death. The stunning beauty tightly hugged the handsome young man and raised her head to accept the marriage from 2 lifetimes. Her posture was so beautiful that even the snowflakes could not help but melt. It was as if they were watching spring flowers blossoming in the cold winter, and peach blossoms spread for thousands of miles. The door was suddenly opened. Qi Feng and Xia Qing saw the scene in front of them and were both stunned. Xiao Xiao's movements were extremely fast. He held Jiang Ruan's head in his arms with one hand and looked out the door with slight annoyance. Xia Qing's face instantly turned red. She scratched her head and said guiltily, "Third brother, I came to see third sister-in-law. You two continue." After saying this, she tugged at Qi Feng. Qi Feng withdrew his gloomy gaze and smiled, "Lao Wu and I will go to master's place first." After saying this, he closed the door and the two went out together. When Jiang Ruan heard the sound, she had already woken up. At this moment, she buried her head in Xiao Xiao's arms. The man's clear fragrance filled the tip of her nose. For a moment, she did not dare to raise her head to look at Xiao Xiao's expression. Just now, in a moment of excitement, she actually did such a rude thing. She did not know what Xiao Xiao was thinking at this moment. "Are you going to suffocate yourself to death?" Xiao Xiao wanted to laugh a little and pulled Jiang Ruan, who was like an ostrich, out of his arms. Jiang Ruan's cheeks were boiling hot. She pretended to be calm and said, "Where is this? What happened to me?" When Xiao Xiao saw her like this, he seemed to find it very interesting. He reached out and touched her head, saying, "This is Jianan Mountain, the place where I was apprenticed to master. When you were young, you were poisoned and the poison was drawn out. I brought you up the mountain for treatment." "Poisoned?" Jiang Ruan was startled. "You mean when I was young?" "Yes." A trace of coldness flashed in Xiao Xiao's eyes. "I was born with poison." "I know." Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. "When I defeated D Mother, I heard her say that when I was young, in order to get rid of my mother and me, she also had my fourth younger sister, the current Jiang Zhaoyi, poison me. But later, when I was sent to the rural residence, the poison was also removed." This was the first time she had taken the initiative to tell Xiao Xiao about her own matters. Xiao Xiao looked at her with some surprise. When he heard about Jiang Dan, he frowned and said, "Your mother once raised Jiang Dan." "Unfortunately, she raised a wolf," Jiang Ruan said indifferently. "She was afraid of Xia Yan's coercion. Originally, she only wanted to poison my mother and fourth younger brother. But later, she was just afraid that I would divide her affection, so she also poisoned me. Perhaps she was not only afraid that I would divide her affection, but was also paving the way for the future. In the previous life, Jiang Dan was a Shu daughter, but in the end, she also became a first-rank titled madam. It was clear that she had started planning a long time ago. Even her poisoning might have been a conspiracy. Who knew? Leave this matter to me." Xiao Xiao said indifferently, "You just need to recuperate." "No need," Jiang Ruan said. Xiao Xiao's movements paused. Jiang Ruan looked at him and smiled. "I want to do this matter myself. I know who that person is." "Who?" Xiao Xiao asked. "The person who poisoned me." Jiang Ruan looked down. "I was careless. But I will be careful in the future." She raised her eyes and smiled at Xiao Xiao. Although the smile was very faint, there was something different about it. Xiao Xiao was sensitive to the fact that something seemed to have changed unknowingly. He was slightly startled and looked at her without saying a word. In the imperial palace, in the imperial concubine hall, The woman was dressed in embroidered clothes, and her expression seemed to be very comfortable. The hall was full of warmth, and the fragrance of incense curled up in spirals. Exquisite jade wares were casually placed in the compartments. Obviously, the mistress was extremely pampered. Jiang Dan slowly picked up a plum from the crystal plate and put it in her mouth. She looked at the person in gray in front of her and said, "In the end, I did as you said." "Why did you make me say that?" The person in gray's long robe covered all the way to her feet, and the hat almost covered half of her face, revealing only her beautiful chin. Her tone was somewhat slow and strange. People who know too much will only have more trouble in the end. "Does Zhao really want to know?" Jiang Ruan's action of picking up the plum paused, and a trace of imperceptible nervousness flashed across her face. She was an intelligent person, and naturally knew the meaning of this sentence. The difference between her and Jiang Su was that she never had to control others and put herself in the highest position. Before that, she always knew how to lie low, and she always knew when to stop. The meaning behind this person's words was really thought-provoking. Moreover, Jiang Su had a feeling that the person in front of her was not ordinary. She immediately laughed and said, "Why did you want me to say those things?" "I don't care, as long as I can achieve what you said. Previously, you said that as long as I said that, Jiang Ruan can no longer exist in this world. Now that there has been no news of her for a long time, you couldn't have failed, right?" Previously in the palace, Jiang Dan had seen this person in gray in front of her through Xianli. The person in gray sent Xianli away and told her about Jiang Ruan. Strangely, he seemed to be able to understand Jiang Dan's fear of Jiang Ruan, and proposed cooperation to make Jiang Ruan disappear from this world. With Jiang Dan's cautious temperament, she should not have agreed to the person in gray's request so hastily. But now that Jiang Ruan was already genieing Wang Fei, and looking at her appearance, Xiao doted on her. This really made Jiang Dan very uneasy. If she could get rid of Jiang Ruan as soon as possible, that would be for the best. Moreover, this matter did not require her to take the risk. She only needed to say a few words. Although she did not understand what method the person in gray had used, it was clear that Jiang Ruan had unknowingly offended someone who seemed to be very difficult to deal with. This, to Jiang Dan, was exactly what she wanted to see happen. "Your suspicion is unnecessary," the person in gray said. "If you don't believe me, Zhao can do it herself." Jiang Dan's expression tightened, and then she smiled. "Of course I believe you. I will wait for your good news. After the matter is done, I will have to thank you." Zhao should be thanking herself. The person in gray suddenly laughed. Although his expression could not be seen, one could hear the laughter in his voice. It faintly brushed past one's heart, and it really made one feel a little scared. He said, "If it were not for Zhao's methods many years ago, today's matter would not have been so easy. Therefore, it is all thanks to Zhao's plans many years ago." His every word seemed to heavily knock on Jiang Dan's body. Jiang Dan's body trembled, as if someone had peeped into her deepest secret, and she almost collapsed on the chair. She had originally thought that besides Xia Yan and Jiang Ruan, no one else in the world knew about this matter. Xia Yan was already dead, so there was nothing to fear. The only person she had to be wary of was Jiang Ruan. But this stranger of unknown origin seemed to have already known about it. How did he find out? What did he want to do? She forced herself to be calm and said, "I don't know what you are talking about." The person in gray slowly stood up, and there was a trace of strangeness in his voice. "Zhao Nyang need not be too worried. My goal is the same as yours. Because what we want is for her to disappear. On this point, you and I are no different. As for other matters, I do not have the mind to discipline her, so Zhao Nyang need not worry too much." "Do you have enmity with her?" Jiang Dan asked tentatively. "In fact, I have no enmity with Hong and Junju." The person in gray's reply made Jiang Dan's heart tighten. Immediately after, she heard the person in gray say, "But she obstructs others, so she must disappear." The person in gray's reply made Jiang Dan sigh in relief. She secretly suppressed the doubts in her heart and a smile floated on her face. No matter what, I will wait for your good news. The scenery of Jianan Mountain was different from that of the capital. There was not a trace of the bustling atmosphere of a marketplace. Instead, it was like a utopia. When Jiang Yuan woke up, she found that the place she was in was very beautiful. Even someone like her, who did not care about the outside world, was shocked by the beautiful scenery in front of her. This place seemed to be isolated from the world of mortals, without the slightest bit of contamination. It seemed that as long as someone stepped into this place, their heart would be cleansed of all regrets. It was also in Luyang Manor that Jiang Yuan met Xiao Xiao's master, Mr. Ba Qi. This was an old man who looked very sage-like. Unlike Su Kong Dao Zhang, who pretended to be immortal, Mr. Ba Qi had a temperament that was detached from the world of mortals. He had a gentle temperament, and from playing a game of chess with Jiang Yuan, she could see that his mind was clear and exquisite. He was a person of great wisdom. Because Xia Qing had not studied the poison in Jiang Yuan's body, she had been diligently practicing medicine these days. She once again flipped through all the medical books in Jianan Mountain's attic, wanting to make up for her lack of skill. She stayed in the attic all day and did not see him. Now that Xiao Xiao and Qi Feng had gone out to hunt, there were only Jiang Yuan and Mr. Ba Qi in the huge Luyang Manor. The chessboard was exquisite. Mr. Ba Qi picked up a black piece and put it down. He suddenly said, "Xiao is very worried about you." Jiang Yuan looked up at Mr. Ba Qi. Mr. Ba Qi smiled slightly. "Girl, watch the game." His expression was calm. Jiang Yuan could not think of anything else, so she reached out to pick up a black piece from the porcelain jar and put it down. She said, "I know." "Girl, do you like Ah Xiao?" Mr. Ba Qi asked. It was a little strange for an elder to ask a junior this question. Moreover, he was Xiao Xiao's teacher. Jiang Yuan did not want to hide anything from this wise old man in front of her. Almost without hesitation, she answered straightforwardly, "I like him. I have accepted a total of 9 disciples. Among the 9 disciples, Xiao's temperament is the coldest." Mr. Ba Qi did not raise his head and put down another piece. His tone seemed to be reminiscing. At that time in Jianan Mountain, he originally practiced the art of Qi Huang. Even if the incident at Jining Wang Fu did not happen, he still carried a lot of burdens. Although he learned the art of Qi Huang, he did not value it. In fact, he was the disciple with the most spiritual nature. My 9 disciples all practiced 9 unique skills. Mr. Ba Qi smiled, but later, when the incident at Jining Wang Fu happened, Xiao knelt in front of me and wanted to learn how to kill. His expression was slightly sad. Xiao's temperament is not suitable to be the world's #1 killer. I did not agree. On that day, there was a lot of snow on Jianan Mountain. He knelt at the foot of the mountain for 3 days and 3 nights. Jiang Yuan's hand slightly paused, and then she put down another piece. She had never seen that kind of Xiao Xiao. However, the incident at Jining Wang Fu, to Xiao Xiao, should be the same as when Zhao Mei and Jiang Xing had met with misfortune. Naturally, it was a heart-wrenching pain. Now, Xiao Xiao was calm and introverted. His joy and anger did not show on his face. It seemed that nothing could shake the indifference between his brows. However, as long as one thought of that noble youth slowly lifting the corner of his robe and slowly kneeling in the snow-covered mountain, his back perfectly straight, that silent scene was enough to move one's countenance. Later on, I agreed to him. Ah Xiao treats himself harshly because he can be a person that he is not suited to be. He has been in the genie guard for so many years, but he has never once complained of bitterness. I believe that this is his perseverance. After so many years, it seems that he no longer has any weaknesses. He looked at Jiang Yuan, his gaze full of smiles. "Girl, you are the first, you are his weakness." His hand rose and fell, and the game on the chessboard immediately underwent an earth-shaking change. He said, "However, I am very happy that you can become his weakness, because in this way, he appears to be more like a person." Jiang Yuan was silent for a moment, and as she pondered, she placed down a chess piece. "I will not hurt him. He is my husband." If someone makes things difficult for him, regardless of whether I can do it or not, I will use all my strength to help him vent his anger. In her previous life, that person had done her kindness, and in this life, it would not be enough to repay him. Moreover, in this life, he had once again helped her. How could the debt he owed be not enough? It would be better to owe him for a lifetime. In any case, she had already tied herself and Xiao Xiao together. Teacher Ba Qi stroked his beard and quickly placed down a chess piece. Girl, is it because of the karma of your previous life that you are so protective of Ah Xiao? Jiang Ruan's hand trembled, and she almost lost the chess piece in her hand. In a flash, her gaze became indifferent and vigilant, and she looked at the old man in front of her without saying a word. Ah Xiao has always had his own ideas. When the girl was unconscious, she once revealed a few words. Ah Xiao is very intelligent, and it is not that he does not know. It is just that he is not willing to take the initiative to ask. Ah Xiao is not willing to ask, but this old man wants to ask on his behalf. This old man is Ah Xiao's master, and in my heart, I also treat Ah Xiao as my own child. Girl, although you are the person that Ah Xiao likes, in this old man's opinion, you are still not honest enough with him, Teacher Ba Qi said slowly. However, in Jiang Ruan's heart, it was as if raging waves had been set off. Xiao Xiao actually knew. Naturally, she knew that Teacher Ba Qi had no reason to lie about this matter, and that it was very likely that Xiao Xiao had guessed her secret. In her dream, she had seen the ending of her previous life, and perhaps she had inadvertently said something. In an instant, Jiang Ruan felt a sense of humiliation from the bottom of her heart, as if she had been spied on. If someone else had known, it would not have mattered, but that person was Xiao Xiao. How would Xiao Xiao view her, who had been born from the darkness, in such a sorry state? Girl, you do not need to worry, Teacher Ba Qi seemed to have seen through her apprehension, and gently said, since Ah Xiao did not choose to ask, he does not care about this matter. The person who has always cared about is not him, but you. I do not know how Master knew about this matter, Jiang Ruan said with difficulty. I did not intentionally hide it from him, I just could not face it. Girl, the person you cannot face is Ah Xiao, or yourself? Teacher Ba Qi asked. Jiang Ruan was startled. Master, what do you mean by this? Ah Xiao does not care about this matter. No matter what the ending is, he will gladly endure it. If you care about what he thinks, you do not need to, because he will not have any other feelings towards you because of this matter. The person you cannot face has always been yourself, that's all. Master is right, I really cannot face myself, Jiang Ruan said. I am not afraid of other people's gazes, whether they regard me as a monster or a ghost. But if I were to be placed in front of him like this, I would feel too ashamed to show my face. Her tone was frank, and there was not the slightest bit of concealment. I cannot face myself standing by his side like this, so I will never take the initiative to tell him about this matter. If it were not for this matter, I would never have told this secret for the rest of my life. Some things will only add to the troubles, and I am not willing to add to this trouble. Then what about now? Teacher Ba Qi smiled slightly. As Master said, he does not care, so why should I care? Jiang Ruan said indifferently, this time, when I was in danger, I saw a lot of things that I did not understand. I also understood some of the difficult problems that I did not understand before, and I feel that I owe him a lot. Some things are destined to happen, so why should I obstruct them? Don't worry, Master, I will tell him the whole story. After listening to these things, whether he despises me or doesn't care, it is all his decision. I respect him. After saying this, Jiang Ruan seemed to have unloaded a heavy burden that she had been carrying for many years. The secret of her rebirth had been buried in her heart since the beginning of this life. She had walked step by step with difficulty, but she had never thought of sharing it with anyone, not even with the person closest to her, Jiang Xing. She had intended to carry it alone to the end. But now, there was another person to carry it with her. Perhaps the burden would lighten a lot, or perhaps nothing would be lightened. No matter what the result was, she was happy to endure it, and did not feel sad. She spoke so openly that a trace of admiration flashed in Teacher Ba Qi's eyes, and he said slowly, "Congratulations. Little girl, you no longer have any inner demons." Jiang Ruan was stunned. "Teacher Ba Qi said, just now, you said that you did not tell Ah Shao because it was difficult to face him, but now I feel that it is not a bad thing." The old man in front of her suddenly winked at her mischievously, and his tone was full of mischief. "At least, it shows that you truly care about Ah Shao." Chapter 193. In the depths of the jungle in the distance, the man in purple dismounted and looked at the young man in black on the horse. "Third brother, after so many years, your aim is still so good." Xiao Xiao also turned over and dismounted. Behind the shiny fur of the mount, there was a string of prey hanging upside down. Among them, a white wolf was extremely eye-catching. Its whole body was snow-white without a trace of mixed hair. It was huge and there was an arrow in its throat. Obviously, it had been shot. Hunting in this kind of snowy jungle was difficult. The white wolf's fur color was also integrated with the snow. One must have very good eyesight to distinguish it. This wolf was huge and agile. Unfortunately, it met Xiao Xiao. In the end, it was still in the bag. "It's just a beast." Xiao Xiao did not care. Qi Feng paused. Third brother killed the white wolf to make a cloak for third sister-in-law. This white wolf skin is hard to find. Third sister-in-law has just recovered from a serious illness and needs to take good care of her body. Xiao Xiao looked at him and did not speak. In fact, what Qi Feng said was right. Seeing him so cold, Qi Feng did not mind. He just shook his head and smiled. "Although the white wolf skin is good, unfortunately, third sister-in-law hates white. If it is red fox skin, she should like it more." Xiao Xiao stopped and looked at him. He said lightly, "What do you want to say?" Qi Feng smiled bitterly. These days, the relationship between the two had always been a little strange. Even Xia Qing, the brainless doctor, could see that something was wrong. Naturally, it was because Jiang Ruan was in a coma a few days ago. Qi Feng's actions made Xiao Xiao unhappy. He looked into the distance and could faintly see the peak of Jia Nan Mountain. He said, "Third brother, you are the third senior in Jia Nan Mountain. Among the 9 brothers, you are the most intelligent. Nothing is difficult for you. Even if I learned the art of politics, in terms of intelligence, I am not as good as you." Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Qi Feng's voice, which seemed to be filled with memories, came from his side. "In the beginning, you were indifferent and treated everyone coldly. Except for the second brother who could talk to you for a while, you looked down on the rest of the brothers. At that time, we were still young, all of us were youths. When we saw your actions, we thought that you were proud and arrogant, so we didn't want to be associated with you." Qi Feng smiled. In the beginning, the 9 of them lived together on Mount Jia, and all they had to do every day was to practice on the mountain. At that time, they only felt that the days were hard. Later on, when they left the mountain, they truly saw the ostentatious hustle and bustle behind the boundless secular world. Only then did they realize that the days on the mountain were the best. "Third brother once saved my life, right here." Qi Feng suddenly said, "I still remember third brother's appearance at that time. You didn't say anything. At that time, I was very scared, but you didn't look nervous at all. At that time, I felt that you were very powerful, so from then on, I really admired you." Many years ago, it was also a snowy day like this. A few of his fellow apprentices came out of the forest to hunt. There shouldn't be any ferocious beasts in the winter deep in the forest. Who knew that on that day, they would encounter a big black bear that came out to look for food? The black bear was tall and fierce. At that time, Guanliang Han and the others were far away and could not come out to help. Seeing that Qi Feng, who only knew a little bit of kung fu, was about to die under the black bear's sharp mouth, but halfway through, an arrow flew and pierced into the black bear's mouth. The black bear was furious, and the man caught up from behind. Arrows could not be used, so Xiao Xiao pulled out the short dagger on his body and faced it without changing his expression. Even if it was a person with good skills, facing a beast at such a close distance would inevitably be at a disadvantage, not to mention that Xiao Xiao only had a short dagger in his hand. An inch shorter, an inch more dangerous. One could imagine how dangerous it was. When Xiao Xiao finally subdued the black bear, he had already suffered some injuries. However, he always wore black clothes, so the blood could not be seen. At a glance, except for his pale face, he was as indifferent as usual. At that time, Qi Feng was very nervous, but Xiao Xiao did not say anything. There was no deep hatred between the youths. Usually, it was just a fight. It was better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. Xiao Xiao's calmness and indifference at that moment almost made Qi Feng look at him in a different light. He seemed to see from that incident that this cold-faced senior was not as unreasonable as he appeared to be. It was just that he was not good at expressing himself. Qi Feng admired such a courageous person from the bottom of his heart. It was precisely because of this that after finishing his apprenticeship, he did not enter the imperial court as everyone thought. Instead, he went to Xiao Xiao's genie guard's 100 Zhang Tower and hid behind the scenes to work for him. Because in Qi Feng's eyes, following Xiao Xiao's career was more glorious than the so-called glory of the imperial court. Waking up from his memories, Qi Feng smiled slightly. What I want to say is that third brother will always be the person I admire the most. I will not fight for anything, and I have no other thoughts. Third sister-in-law is the most special woman I have ever seen. He sighed softly. If I had met her earlier, I would not be so willing. But since she is your wife, she is just my sister-in-law. In the end, he could not hide the sadness in his tone. I have never thought that you have other thoughts. Xiao Xiao interrupted his words, and his tone was as cold as ever. You will not. The three words, you will not, seemed to be flat and without any ripples, but in an instant, it brought a warm power in this cold mountain. A person like Xiao Xiao should not easily trust others. However, the words, you don't know how, contained a kind of absolute trust. Qi Feng's heart was inexplicably sour, and there was an indescribable bitter taste in his mouth. He shook his head and said, I always feel that it is impossible for any of us brothers to catch up with you. You are better than us. Perhaps it was not just a matter of time before he lost. Xiao Xiao was indeed an excellent person in the world and was very compatible with Jiang Yuan. Today, with these words, Qi Feng opened his heart and took the initiative to erase the estrangement. Xiao Xiao's answer also showed his attitude. Although his heart was sour, in the end, he had put down a stone. Qi Feng wanted to liven up the atmosphere, so he smiled and changed the topic. No matter what, third sister-in-law is fine. Surviving a disaster will only lead to more good fortune. It's just that this matter cannot be separated from the southern frontier. The people of the southern frontier are already preparing to take action in the capital. Xianli has a close relationship with the southern frontier. Maybe he is also involved in this matter. I will not let him go. Xiao Xiao said. He probably wants to use the same old trick again. Qi Feng said, in the beginning, he did such a thing and squandered the friendship between us brothers. Although Master has expelled him from the sect, every time I think about it, I feel disgusted. Qi Feng sighed. With his vengeful nature, if one day the great cause of the world falls into his hands, the first one he will not spare will be our Jia Nan mountain. There will not be such a day. Xiao Xiao said. I know that third brother will not let him succeed. We have not forgotten about ninth brother. Qi Feng looked at his sleeves. The debt he owes will be repaid one day. When Qi Feng and Xiao Xiao returned to Green Poplar Manor, Xia Qing, who came out to brew medicine, was unexpectedly happy to see the prey the two brought back. It turned out that the white wolf bone was a precious medicine that could be used as medicine. She immediately dragged the white wolf back and said that she would send the wolf skin back. Xiao Xiao had always been generous with these things. Except for the wolf skin, the rest were useless to him, so he immediately agreed. I heard that white wolves are very difficult to hunt. How did you hunt one? In her previous life, Jiang Ruan had seen a white wolf skin in the palace. Xianli had spent a lot of money to buy it from an outside merchant. White wolves that didn't have a single strand of hair on their bodies were hard to come by. Using arrows or knives would leave flaws on the wolf's skin. At that time, a complete white wolf skin was indeed enviable, but Xianli gave it to Imperial Concubine Chen. Imperial Concubine Chen made the white wolf skin into a wolfskin scarf and piled it up on her neck. The emperor praised it very much. Xiao Xiao went out for a trip and came back with a white wolf. She could not help but be a little curious. Xiao Xiao looked at her and said, "Use arrows." Jiang Ruan, Xiao Xiao saw that she was speechless and could not help but laugh. Jiang Ruan glared at him. This person was deliberately teasing her. Suddenly, she thought of something and asked, "I heard from Master that you had 9 martial brothers. I just saw the other brothers' calligraphy and paintings in the attic. Why don't I see 8th martial brother?" Jiang Ruan had seen almost all of Xiao Xiao's martial brothers. Except for eldest martial brother Shueda and 6th martial brother Du Lu, they were traveling and temporarily not in Jin Kingdom. However, when Xia Qing brought up the matter of number 8 and number 9, she would stammer and evade it. Xia Qing was an honest person and did not know how to lie. This kind of attitude was really strange in Jiang Ruan's eyes. At this moment, seeing that Xiao Xiao suddenly thought of this matter, she casually mentioned it. When Xiao Xiao heard this, his expression changed slightly. He did not immediately answer, but slowly frowned. Jiang Ruan was stunned and said, "If you don't want to say." Number 8 is Xianli. Not waiting for her to finish, Xiao Xiao interrupted her. 9th martial brother is actually 9th martial sister. She died because of Xianli. After this incident, Xianli was expelled from the school by Master. Xiao Xiao's words were as concise and comprehensive as usual, but this short sentence made people's hearts jump with fear. Even Jiang Ruan was shocked by the twists and turns in his words and was somewhat speechless. She had been with Xianli for a long time, but she had never known that Xianli and Xiao Xiao were fellow martial brothers. Moreover, she did not know that Xianli and Xiao Xiao had such a grudge. Seeing her shocked expression, Xiao Xiao reached out and held her soft hand. His hand was slender and had distinct joints. It did not have the coarseness of ordinary martial artists. Instead, it had a kind of lustrous and powerful beauty. It was really pleasing to the eye. Jiang Ruan looked up at him. Xiao Xiao sighed and said, "Sit down, I will slowly tell you." Although Mr. Hakone of the Jianan Mountain had lived in seclusion, he was known as Mr. Destiny. Many people wanted to send their sons to Jianan Mountain to learn martial arts. However, Mr. Hakone's temperament was eccentric. He would not accept anyone who was not pleasing to his eyes. The 9 disciples who were accepted by Master Ba Qi had their own merits and were all dragons and phoenixes among men. Master Shui was a glib talker, Guan Er had the bravery of a general, Xiao San was the best assassin, Qi Si was a military genius, Xia Wu was skilled in medicine, Du Lu had a pair of skillful hands that could make all kinds of hidden weapons, Mo Qiyu was a world-shaking genius, Xian Ba had the air of an emperor, and Bai Jiu inherited Master Ba Qi's mantle and practiced divination. At that time, Bai Jiu's name was Bai Zhu. She was an abandoned baby that Master Ba Qi had picked up from outside. He raised her and had always treated her as his own daughter. Master Ba Qi accepted 8 male disciples, and Bai Zhu was a woman. Although Jianan Mountain did not have a strict barrier between men and women, if news of this were to spread, it would affect the way people looked at Bai Zhu. Master Ba Qi ordered Bai Zhu to dress as a man, and she usually addressed Xiao Xiao and the others as martial brothers. In name, she was the 9th junior brother, but in fact, she was the 9th junior sister. There was only one little sister on Jianan Mountain, and Bai Zhu was indeed smart and lovely. She was also raised by Master Ba Qi to have an innocent temperament. All of them doted on Bai Zhu very much. In these long years, Bai Zhu finally grew from a little girl to a beautiful girl. No matter how much she dressed as a man, she could not hide the fact that Bai Zhu was a woman, especially at the age of a flower. Which girl did not yearn for love? No one knew when Bai Zhu fell in love with Xianli. In all fairness, Xianli was indeed a very outstanding young man in Jianan Mountain. He was born handsome and elegant, and he had the unique noble temperament of the royal family. What was more rare was that he did not put on airs at all, and he treated people gently and politely. Not only Bai Zhu, but also his martial brothers at that time were sincere friends with him. The disciples who grew up in Jianan Mountain were very lively because of Master Ba Qi. In comparison, Xiao Xiao and Xian Li's behavior was more mature and restrained, but compared with the cold Xiao Xiao, it was obvious that Xian Li, who was always smiling, was more like a spring breeze. Bai Zhu was a girl with a bright temperament, and she had hardly come into contact with the human world at the foot of the mountain. Her world was simple and fragile, almost transparent. It was very obvious that she liked someone. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Bai Zhu liked Xian Li, and Xian Li could naturally see that. If she didn't like someone, she could just say that she didn't like him. The most hateful thing was to use other people's feelings to achieve her own secrets. At that time, Xian Li learned how to rule the world, and he was originally a member of the royal family, so it was understandable that he learned this. Bai Zhu was proficient in divination, but she could not divine the divination of herself and the people close to her. Master Ba Qi said that this was the destiny of heaven. The books in Master Ba Qi's attic could be flipped at will, but when Master Ba Qi taught her something, he left a trick, which was the so-called key to the lifeline of the royal family, the celestial phenomenon of the dragon vein. No one knew when Xian Li became interested in this matter. The terrible thing was that he was only a teenager at that time, but he could resist the desire in his heart and plan. On the surface, he acted like a brother to Jianan Mountain, but on the other hand, he secretly instigated Bai Zhou to steal Master Ba Qi's celestial phenomenon map. Bai Zhou was just a budding girl at that time, and she didn't understand conspiracies and desires at all, let alone the meaning of what Xian Li wanted her to do. She just thought that it was an ordinary senior brother who asked her to steal some food and some copper coins. Master Ba Qi treated his disciples strictly, but he treated her very leniently. Bai Zhu wanted to steal the celestial phenomenon map for Xian Li, but she didn't expect that the celestial phenomenon map was not an ordinary object, and there were hidden traps in it. Bai Zhu only knew a little self-defense, so she couldn't withstand the poisonous hidden weapons, and was immediately hit by the hidden weapons. The poison had to be detoxified within 2 hours. If Bai Zhu had been found earlier, she wouldn't have died. But the celestial phenomenon map was hidden in the secret room, and only Xian Li knew that Bai Zhu had gone to the secret room. He didn't say a word and didn't tell anyone about it because he was afraid of getting into trouble. Bai Zhu was killed by the hidden weapons in the secret room, and she was found 1 day later. Xian Li said he didn't know anything at that time, but in the end, Master Ba Qi found some clues. Jianan Mountain didn't accept treacherous people, let alone such a beast with a human face. Bai Zhu was the daughter of Xian Li's master, and she treated him sincerely. But because of his insidiousness and selfishness, she died in vain. Xian Li refused to admit it, and there was no other evidence. At that time, Imperial concubine Chen was in the limelight. If they killed Xian Li privately, it would only bring trouble to Jianan Mountain's disciples. Bai Zhu was the little sister of their brothers, and they had always cared for her as a family member. Because of this, she died tragically, so everyone was furious. If they wanted to do something secretly, it wouldn't be impossible to make Xian Li pay with his life. But in the end, Master Ba Qi appeared and stopped the angry brothers. He said that he had long calculated that Bai Zhu would have such a tribulation in her life. Even if it wasn't Xian Li, it would be someone else. Similarly, Xian Li would also have his own fate tribulation. People outside the world couldn't intervene in the affairs of the world. Xian Li would taste the bitter fruit of what he had sown today. In the end, Master Ba Qi's words made the brothers give up the idea of secretly killing Xian Li. But they could no longer live with Xian Li in Jianan Mountain. Even if Master Ba Qi was a saint, he couldn't remain indifferent after hurting his daughter, who he regarded as his own. After this matter, he expelled Xianli from the sect and announced that Xianli had nothing to do with Jianan Mountain anymore. From then on, when they met Xianli again, the brothers just treated him as a stranger. The matter of Baijiu was a taboo in Jianan Mountain, and no one had ever mentioned him. He actually used the same old trick. Jiang Ruan murmured. Jiang Ruan muttered. Suddenly, she realized that Xiao Xiao was looking at her. Realizing that there was something wrong with her words, Jiang Ruan hurriedly said, "What I meant was that he had actually been scheming for so long." Xiao Xiao's memories of the past were really tortuous and heavy, and the Baizhu in it was almost exactly the same as the situation in her previous life. Didn't they all fall in love with a modest gentleman in their hearts and get close to him with great joy, only to find that he was a hungry wolf that ate people without spitting out their bones? In the end, they lost their lives in vain. She suddenly felt a little sad, as if she was a fox mourning the death of a rabbit. It turned out that whether it was in her previous life or this life, Xian Li's means had never been aimed at her alone. He used other people's sincerity to achieve his goals, and she and Baizhu were just a little stupid. He is Jianan Mountain's enemy. One day, this debt will be repaid. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. Jiang Ruan looked at him sideways, and her beautiful charming eyes faintly rose, seeming to be a little mischievous. Xiao Xiao was a little scared by her stare and asked, "What's wrong?" Ninth Shimi is clever and quick-witted, naive and unaffected, and is the treasure of her fellow apprentices. Jiang Ruan said slowly, "But recently, she has actually chosen Xianli, and you can't even compare to her?" Xiao Xiao glanced at her, and a helpless expression floated on his handsome face. He thought about it and said, "She is just a younger sister." Jiang Ruan shook her head and said, "You said that ninth Shimi is naturally 1 in 100, but I feel that there is one bad thing about her, and that is that her eyesight is not good." She looked at Xiao Xiao and suddenly became bold. She reached out to pinch Xiao Xiao's cheeks and pulled them apart. "If I were her, I would definitely not choose Xianli." "What's so good about Xianli?" "He's just a little pretentious." "In my opinion," she said with a smile, "this person in front of me is more beautiful, has more elegant manners, is smarter, and has better martial arts. In terms of wealth, she is even richer than a country. Although her status can't be compared, and she isn't a member of the royal family, she is exactly what I want." Although her usual smile was gorgeous, it was always somewhat estranged. This time, after she woke up from her serious illness, she seemed to have changed. Every time she smiled in front of Xiao Xiao, it was genuine and refreshing. Her smile was bright and moving, like spring flowers and autumn moons, and the charm in her eyes was almost dazzling. Xiao Xiao could not help but be slightly absent-minded when she pulled his face, but he did not care about her rude behavior. Instead, he took advantage of the situation to hold her waist and smiled lightly. "Exactly what you want?" Jiang Ruan was stunned, and her hands unconsciously loosened. Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows, but he was somewhat happy. "It's my honor." After saying this, he bent down and lightly pecked her lips. Jiang Ruan. Pervert. The days in Jianan Mountain were relaxed and happy, as if all the mundane world could be temporarily forgotten. Every day was leisurely. This was the place where Xiao Xiao grew up. Xiao Xiao took her through the valley that he used to repair, as if she could grow up with him this way. However, good times always passed quickly. After Jiang Ruan fully recovered from her injuries, it was time to go down the mountain and return to the capital. At this special time, Xia Qing and Qi Feng also followed her back to the capital. Teacher Ba Qida also had to continue his seclusion. Before leaving, Jiang Ruan sat in the carriage, leaned against Xiao Xiao, and said, "If there is a day in the future when everything is settled, I would be willing to come here and stay for a while. My mood seems to be much more open. If you like it, I will bring you here often." Xiao Xiao patted her head. Jiang Ruan paused, then said, "Actually, Xiao Xiao, I have something to hide from you." Xiao Xiao looked up at her. "This is my secret. I originally intended to not tell anyone in this life. But now I have changed my mind." Jiang Ruan lowered her head, and it was unknown whether she was avoiding Xiao Xiao's gaze, but her voice contained an indescribable subtle emotion. I want to break the barrier between us, and I intend to tell you. But not now. After returning to the capital, I will tell you about this matter after I have dealt with the matter. After telling you, no matter how you look at me, I will accept it. Xiao Xiao was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and gently but firmly turned her head, forcing her to look directly at him. His dark eyes were bottomless, like ripples in the calm waters of a pond, so magnificent that it made people dizzy. Ah, Wan, I don't care. If you think it's too much, you don't have to say it. He smiled faintly. No matter what happens, in my eyes, you are still you. Your so-called barrier has never existed in my heart. Chapter 194. The journey back was much easier than the journey. After teacher Ba Qi detoxified Jiang Ruan's poison, Xiao Xiao sent a messenger pigeon to the capital to deliver the news. On the way back, Jiang Ruan saw the snow pigeon. It was very cute and lively, and it was very close to her. It had another name, Hu Ba, which was said to have been given by housekeeper Lin. Indeed, in a place like Jining Wangfu, where there were more men than women, it was impossible to find a more elegant name. When they returned to Jining Wangfu, housekeeper Lin had been waiting for a long time. Seeing Jiang Ruan return safe and sound, he was so happy that tears streamed down his face. Ji Jiao wanted to immediately return to the ancestral shrine to comfort the ancestors and thank the ancestors of the Xiao family for their blessing. Lu Zhu and the others had stayed in the Fu because Xiao Xiao had to hurry on his journey. These days, they had lost a lot of weight. When Jiang Ruan got off the carriage, a few servant girls surrounded her and asked all sorts of questions. Lu Zhu smiled and said, "Now Miss can be considered well. One who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune later on. Now that you have escaped danger, we must properly celebrate." Bai Ji was deeply worried. It is better not to leave behind any lingering illness. After all, it has been poisoned for so many years. This servant is relieved that Miss is fine. Why are you saying these discouraging things? Lian Xiao glared at Bai Ji. Now that Miss has returned safely, the past is in the past. In the future, just be more careful. Tian Zhu lowered her head and said in a slightly annoyed tone, "This subordinate did not protect young madam well, please punish me." The genie guards had always taken their duties very seriously. Now that she was Jiang Ruan's personal guard, Jiang Ruan had been poisoned under her eyes. No matter how you looked at it, it was all her fault. What does this have to do with you? It is impossible to guard against. Jiang Ruan said gently, "It was just that the other party was too cunning. You can't possibly protect me from being poisoned more than 10 years ago." Tian Zhu looked at Jiang Ruan in surprise. Jiang Ruan's face was warm but her heart was cold. Normally, although she would not make things difficult for her servant girls, her attitude was not particularly close. Especially towards a servant girl who had followed along halfway, she would not take the initiative to comfort her. Now, these words were exonerating her. Looking at Jiang Ruan's eyes, the usual hostility seemed to have dissipated a little and was replaced by a special kind of relief and magnanimity. She did not know what Jiang Ruan encountered on this trip to Jianan with Xiao Xiao to show such a difference. Tian Zhu was still guessing, but she still looked at Xiao Xiao. Jiang Ruan understood what she was thinking and looked at Xiao Xiao. "Since you have given Tian Zhu to me, I have the right to punish her." Xiao Xiao nodded. Jiang Ruan smiled and said, "All right, I've already said that it has nothing to do with you." Tian Zhu carefully glanced at Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao did not have any special reaction. She felt somewhat grateful in her heart and said, "This subordinate thanks young madam and young master for his leniency." Chi Feng coughed twice. "Third sister-in-law, it is better for you to enter the house first. Be careful of catching a cold outside. Now that you have just recovered from your illness, your body is still slightly weak." Everyone agreed, and Lian Xiao and Bai Ji helped Jiang Ruan into the house. Xiao Xiao still had some matters to attend to in the palace, so after comforting Jiang Ruan, he left first. After Xiao Xiao left, Jiang Ruan sat in the room. The room appeared to be a little messy. Jiang Ruan blushed and said, "These few maidservants have been worried about Miss Health these past few days and have not been in the mood to tidy up the room. We will go and sweep now." "There's no hurry," Jiang Ruan said faintly, "I still have some matters to instruct you all on." "What is it?" Dewdrop asked curiously. "Although the poison in my body is an old illness, it was triggered by someone using poison a few days ago. I know who made it." Jiang Ruan took the cup of hot tea from Lian Xiao's hands and took a sip. Tianzhu's expression tightened. "Do you know who that is?" "Although I don't know who personally poisoned me, I know who the mastermind is." Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, "Since he has given me such a big gift, how can I not respond?" The few servant girls looked at each other in dismay, not understanding the meaning behind Jiang Ruan's words. After a long time, Dewdrop said, "Is this person the same person who poisoned Miss more than 10 years ago? Why would he do such a vicious thing to Miss? If it was First Furin?" Dewdrop frowned and said, "Now that First Furin is already dead, how could she instruct someone to poison Miss? That person is not Xia Yan." Jiang Ruan looked at the tea leaves floating in the cup. "This person came from my life many years ago. Now that he has suddenly used the same trick, it is only because he feels that I once again pose a threat to him. That person is in the palace. This debt, along with my mother's, I naturally want to get it back." She sneered. "Xiao Xiao has already gone to make arrangements. Tomorrow morning, I will make them pay." Lian Xiao and the others looked at each other. Since Jiang Ruan did not make it clear, it was naturally because the person behind it was not simple, and she also had her own ideas. The few servant girls had followed her for so long, they naturally understood her intentions and would not continue to question her. Tianzhu asked, "What does Miss want us to do?" "I have already made a foolproof plan. Since that person is in the palace, I naturally have to return the favor in the palace. Tomorrow, you will follow me to the palace. There are some things that I also want to clarify." She smiled faintly, but there was a biting chill in her eyes, causing Lian Xiao and the others to shiver uncontrollably. In a corner of the palace, Jiang Dan fiercely threw the porcelain bottle in her hand to the ground. With a crisp, "hua-la" sound, the sparkling and translucent fragments burst everywhere. The surrounding palace maids did not dare to breathe loudly, and one of them hurriedly knelt down to pick up the fragments. Jiang Dan angrily said, "Get out." The palace maids jumped in fright and hurriedly retreated. Only Jiang Dan was left in the huge palace. Her expression was no longer as charming and adorable as usual, but rather somewhat frightening. She forcefully clenched her fists and unconsciously gritted her teeth. Even if one was more tolerant, the longer one stayed in a place like the palace, the higher one stood, the easier it was for one's true nature to be exposed. And once one lost one's composure, it was extremely easy for one to be caught. However, even now, Jiang Dan was still relatively clear-headed. Therefore, before anyone discovered any clues, she still remembered to drive all the palace maids out. She had always been a careful person. Not only was Jiang Ruan safe and sound, but she had also appeared in the horse carriage outside Jinying Wangfu. When this matter reached her ears, Jiang Dan's hands trembled. In the past few days, no matter how hard she tried, she could not find any news of Jiang Ruan. Jinying Wangfu was so impregnable that even a fly could not fly out. Moreover, Jiang Ruan had just met with an accident, so she did not dare to go against the wind and commit a crime at this critical juncture. Originally, she thought that since there was no news of Jiang Ruan for so long, the odds were against her. Who knew that Jiang Ruan would swagger back to Jinying Wangfu in a horse carriage? She did not even know when Jiang Ruan had left. She did not expect that Jiang Ruan would be so lucky, but Jiang Dan felt even more panicked. Since Jiang Ruan's body had completely recovered, she would certainly know that the poison from her youth was still present in her body. If she truly investigated, sooner or later, it would be traced back to her. With Jiang Ruan's sinister temperament, it was obvious from the fate of Xia Yan's family that she would not easily give up. Once she was discovered, Jiang Ruan would certainly not forgive her. Every time she thought of this, Jiang Dan felt a burst of panic in her heart. She thought of that gray-clothed man and could not help but complain in her heart. At that time, they had agreed that even if Jiang Ruan had great abilities, it would be difficult for her to escape this calamity. Who would have thought that in the end, a mishap would still occur? After thinking for a while, she walked to the table at the side, took a pen from the jade tube, and pretended to write a letter to someone else. It was also in the palace, but there was someone whose mood was completely different from Jiang Dan's. In the southern Yuan, Xiao Xiao had just walked into the hall when a delicate youth stepped forward. Without being polite, he grabbed his sleeve and said, "She's back. She's in the Fu." Xiao Xiao pulled out his sleeve without batting an eyelid. 13th Prince, do you intend to visit my wife? For a subject to address himself as I in front of a prince, Xiao Xiao was really bold. However, the little prince did not have the slightest awareness of being bullied. Immediately, a trace of obvious joy flashed across his face. All right, when are you leaving? For the past 10 days, Xian Pei had been in the palace like a year. Every day, he thought about Jiang Ruan's illness the most. Even when the emperor came to ask him about his homework, he was absent-minded and answered many questions wrongly. Even Lu Min could see that he had something on his mind, but Xian Pei naturally would not tell outsiders the reason. With so many things on his mind, Jiang Ruan was bedridden, but he had lost a lot of weight. Later, when he received news from Xiao Xiao that Jiang Ruan's poison had been cured, Xian Pei's heart was finally relieved. However, Jiang Ruan and Xiao Xiao did not seem to have any intention of returning, which made Xian Pei extremely angry. In his heart, he did not know how many times he had cursed Xiao Xiao for being sinister and taking Jiang Ruan away. Finally, Jiang Ruan had returned to the capital. No one can take away a prince at will. If your highness wishes to visit my humble abode, you must find a way to come out yourself, Xiao Xiao said lightly. Xian Pei was stunned for a moment by such a blatant bullying, and then he became angry. You are so unreasonable, treating me like this. I will tell her. How about it? Xiao Xiao looked at him. Although there was no special expression on his face, his gaze was full of pressure. Xian Pei was at a loss for words, and for a moment, he was stunned. When he reacted, he felt that he had been suppressed by the other party's gaze, and it was very shameful. In his anger, he shouted, "She will definitely seek justice for me." In the palace, Xian Pei had always behaved calmly beyond his age. Sometimes, it would not be an exaggeration to say that he was more like an adult than an adult. Especially now that he was increasingly valued by the emperor, the servants had almost never seen Xian Pei act childishly. Now that Xiao Xiao had angered him to the point of stamping his feet, he had the rare vigor that someone of his age should have. She is my wife, why should she help you? Xiao Xiao continued. She is still my. Xian Pei was about to finish speaking when he suddenly paused. He raised his head and looked at Xiao Xiao vigilantly, but his heart seemed to be in turmoil. This person's scheming was very deep. With just a few words, he had almost managed to fish out his secret. Xiao Xiao appeared to be cold and indifferent to everything, but in fact, he had a very observant ability. He was well aware that Xian Pei's emotions would become abnormal at the mention of Jiang Ruan, and he also knew what words to use to provoke Xian Pei's emotions. Thus, he said it out loud. Xian Pei's heart, which had just been provoked, slowly calmed down. Looking at Xiao Xiao, he suddenly smiled and said, "Xiao Wangya, by doing this, you are really using your strength to bully the weak." His words were full of sarcasm, but Xiao Xiao did not even blink and said indifferently, 13th Highness is not weak. Xian Pei swallowed his saliva. Who said that Jinying Wang was a cold-faced saint who was above the common people? Once this person became bad, he was really bad. Everywhere he went, he could poke at a person's sore spot. After taking a deep breath, Xian Pei said, "I know what you want to know, but there is no need for me to tell you. Although you and she are husband and wife, but..." Xian Pei smiled maliciously, "Come to think of it, you should not be a real husband and wife. 13th Highness is overstepping your boundaries, Xiao Xiao reminded him. That day will come. Xian Pei was caught off guard by his words. He looked at Xiao Xiao strangely, as if trying to see whether the person in front of him was the same person that others were talking about. After a long while, he shook his head and said, no matter what, she and you can't talk about everything. What you want to know is a secret, and this secret is related to me and her. If you really want her good, think of a way to get me out of the palace. I want to see her. There are some things that I want to explain to her face to face. After that, if she truly trusts you, she will naturally tell you. But I have no obligation to tell you. Xiao Xiao looked at him silently and nodded, okay. Seeing him agree so readily, Xian Pei was relieved and looked at him solemnly. You saved her life before. No matter what, I should thank you on her behalf. No matter what happens, my goal is the same as yours. You and I will not harm her. This was the first time that Xian Pei had sincerely admitted defeat to Xiao Xiao. Perhaps it was because Xiao Xiao had thought of a way to cure the poison in Jiang Ruan's body that Xian Pei was grateful from the bottom of his heart. Xiao Xiao glanced at him. I saved my wife. What does that have to do with you? There is no need to thank me. Xian Pei. Jiang Ruan had only returned to Jinying Princess Fu for a short while when Jiang Xing, who had received the news, rushed back from the barracks. He pulled Jiang Ruan along and nagged her about a bunch of things that she needed to pay attention to when she was sick. If she did not know that this eldest brother of hers had a martial background, Jiang Ruan would have suspected that Jiang Xing was going to change his profession to become a doctor. She had not told the General Fu about the matter of her being poisoned. If Xiao Guang knew that someone had made a move against her and her son more than 10 years ago, she feared that he would immediately go to the minister's Fu and turn it upside down. It was just that now was not the right time. When Jiang Xing brought up this matter, his heart was filled with lingering fear and anger. He only said, what exactly happened? Xiao Xiao did not tell me who poisoned you. Are you not going to tell me either? Bai Ji brought over some plum blossom honey water. Jiang Ruan pushed a cup in front of Jiang Xing and comforted him. I know who that person is. I just don't want to beat the grass and alert the enemy. Eldest brother, don't worry. I will resolve this matter tomorrow morning. This matter is not difficult for me. With Xiao Xiao's help, nothing will happen. Eldest brother also knows what kind of person I am. There is no reason for me to be schemed against. Ruan, I am your eldest brother. Jiang Xing was annoyed. You would rather tell Xiao Xiao than tell me. Is this because you think that eldest brother is useless, so you don't want to tell eldest brother about this matter and let him handle it? Jiang Xing felt a little wronged. Once this sister got married, she would no longer be his sister. He said, when you were young, when you were bullied by others, it was eldest brother who stood up for you. How come you don't remember now? Jiang Ruan helplessly held her forehead. Eldest brother, what are you saying? What does this have to do with me thinking that you are useless? I will naturally tell you about this matter, but not now. Can't you even wait for one more night? Besides, I am not letting you interfere because your position is not right. You are a general. If you interfere in these matters, you will inevitably attract gossip. Xiao Xiao is different. The embroidered uniform guards under him are different from ordinary soldiers. They work in secret and are easy to use. He is my husband, his people are my people. Eldest brother, you don't like him. Is it because you are dissatisfied with me? Jiang Xing was at a loss for words. Why would I be dissatisfied with you? Now that I have obtained this scholarly title, I do not want you to be bullied by others. If I still have to be afraid of others talking about me after I have obtained this scholarly title, and I even have to think about how to stand up for you, what is the point of climbing higher? Seeing Jiang Ruan's slightly stunned expression, Jiang Xing's heart softened. After all, he was afraid that she would think too much and cause trouble for her body that had just recovered from a serious illness. He hurriedly said, all right, whatever you say, I don't care. Wait until tomorrow, you must find that person for me. If he dares to lay his hands on you, I will personally cripple him. Jiang Ruan smiled. Jiang Xing looked at her and suddenly sighed. Although I do not know why, this time when you went to Xiao Xiao's school, you seemed to be much more cheerful. I think it is all thanks to Xiao Xiao. Jiang Ruan was startled. Why does eldest brother say that? You are my younger sister, I understand you. Jiang Xing shook his head. In the past, I always felt that there was something on your heart, even after you got married. But now that you have returned, I feel that your temperament has changed a lot. Originally, I did not like Xiao Xiao. I felt that his temperament was too cold, and that he could not take good care of you. Jiang Xing paused. But now, it seems that he treats you well. Ah Wan, you are so good, how could there be anyone in this world who does not like you? Xiao Xiao's foresight is not bad, and now that you treat him, it is no longer the relationship of an ally that you previously spoke of. Was she actually so obvious? Jiang Ruan's heart skipped a beat, and then she laughed. Does eldest brother not like me like this? No, I am very happy. Jiang Xing smiled slightly. If there is someone in this world who makes you happy, no matter who it is, I will be happy for you. Jiang Xing reached out and patted her head. As long as he treats you well, that is enough. The brother and sister talked for a while. Jiang Xing did not dare to speak with Jiang Ruan for too long, for fear of disturbing her rest. Not long after, he got up and left. Before he left, he carefully reminded Lian Xiao and the others that he would visit her in the Wangfu the next day. After Jiang Xing left, Jiang Ruan rested for a while. The sky gradually turned dark. After drinking her medicine, Jiang Ruan looked at the account book in her room. She did not have time to look at the account book when she went to Jianan Shanfu. Since there was nothing else to do, Jiang Ruan flipped through it. Bai Ji came over and advised, "It is getting late, Miss should go to bed early and rest. It is not too late to look at the account book later." Yes, Du Zhu winked mischievously. Son-in-law is still waiting in the bedroom, Miss has been in the study. Be careful not to catch a cold, or else, son-in-law will find trouble with us. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that after Jiang Ruan and Xiao Xiao returned, there seemed to be some changes between them. The servants were all happy to see that the relationship between the two had improved. Du Zhu even tried to think of ways to make the two of them into a pile. Lian Xiao flicked Duzu's forehead. Little wench, how can you casually make fun of Miss's words? It seems that Miss has treated you too well, so you are becoming more and more lawless. She looked at Jiang Ruan with a grin. But what you said is also pertinent. Miss's body cannot withstand any more torment. It is better for you to rest early, lest son-in-law's heart aches. Jiang Ruan looked at her group of servant girls fooling around and suddenly remembered the scene in her dream when she was poisoned. In her previous life, she had not met these servant girls. She suddenly let out a long sigh. How many years have you all been following me? Lian Xiao and the others were stunned. No one had expected that Jiang Ruan would suddenly say such a thing. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji looked at each other and said, Bai Ji and we have been following Miss since we were young. It has been about 16 years. Du Zhu blinked. Servant has been following Miss since we were in the rural residence. It has been about 6 years. Subordinate has been following young Furin for 2 years, Tian Zhu said softly. So it has been so many years, Jiang Ruan said softly. Miss. Bai Ji said worriedly. Jiang Ruan waved her hand and said with a smile, I'm just feeling a little sentimental. You all have been following me for so many years, but it seems that your lives have not been very good. On the surface, it looks bright, but in reality, there are dangers everywhere. Speaking of which, it is my fault as your master. Her words were inexplicable, so Dewdrop hurriedly said, Miss, please don't say that. It's our good fortune to be able to follow such a considerate person like Mississippi. Miss treats us very well, and we've never felt guilty. Lian Xiao and the others also hurriedly said. Jiang Ruan smiled. It's nothing, I will rest first. You all should also sleep early, you still have to enter the palace early tomorrow morning. As she said this, she stood up. Tianzhu hurriedly draped a coat over her, and Jiang Ruan left the study and entered the bedchamber. The sky had already darkened, and Jining Wang's fu had sunk into silence. There was no sound in the night, and it seemed to be very peaceful. In the middle of the night, light snow began to fall. The ground was wet and cold, and if one were to step on it carelessly, it would be slippery. In such a dark night, an inconspicuous figure suddenly appeared in the courtyard, as if it had woken up in the middle of the night to go to the latrine. However, when it passed by the outermost wall, it seemed as if it had inadvertently squatted down and brushed at a certain spot at the base of the wall. At this moment, the eyes suddenly brightened. In the pitch-black night, several torches suddenly appeared, shining brightly on that person. That person was startled, and hurriedly squatted down to cover his face with his hands. He lowered his head, refusing to let others see his face. A voice sounded extremely clear in the night, "Young madam, he's caught. There's really a thief." Another person said, "Hey, lift up your face." Who is this person? That person's body trembled, and he buried his head even lower. It turned out to be a turtle in a jar. Behind the group of imperial bodyguards, Jiang Ruan slowly walked out from the back. She held a torch in her hand, and the light from the fire illuminated her face, making it appear cold and beautiful. However, there was a faint sorrow in her eyes, as well as a trace of imperceptible disappointment. Chapter 195. Jiang Ruan walked to the person's side and stopped. The secret guards looked at each other. Jiang Ruan looked down at the top of the person's head and finally said, "Baiji, you don't dare to look up at me?" The hidden guards at the side were all startled. The name Baiji was not unfamiliar to the servants of Jining Wang Fu. She was the maidservant who had accompanied the young madam in her dowry. Of Jiang Ruan's 4 maidservants, apart from Tianzhu, who was originally Xiao Xiao's people, the other 3 were all favored by Jining Wang Fu. Baiji was usually the calmest and quietest among the maids. She was also beautiful and pleasant, so the guards often sent gifts to her. Baiji was deeply trusted by Jiang Ruan and was also an old person who had accompanied Jiang Ruan since childhood. Today's capture of the mole was arranged by Jiang Ruan. Hearing Baiji's name, the secret guards were all shocked. The person on the ground did not react for a long time. Jiang Ruan was not anxious, but stood calmly at the side and waited. After a long while, the person on the ground finally tidied up her clothes and slowly stood up, revealing a familiar face. Baiji's expression was as gentle and calm as usual, as if she had just completed a task that Jiang Ruan had instructed her to do. There was not even a trace of panic on her face when she was caught. She just looked at Jiang Ruan and said, "Mrs. Smart, you still caught this servant." This. When the surrounding secret guards saw that it was really Baiji, they were somewhat puzzled. They stared at Baiji as if she was unfamiliar with her, in case she did something harmful to Jiang Ruan. At this moment Lian Xiao and the others who had rushed over after hearing the news also caught up from behind. Seeing Baiji surrounded by secret guards, they could not help but be shocked. Lu Zhu was someone who could not keep her cool, and immediately said, "Baiji Jijia, how can it be you?" Lian Xiao and Baiji grew up together, and the two of them had a deep friendship. Seeing this scene, Lian Xiao was shocked, and the first thought that came to her mind was that Baiji had been wrongly accused. She anxiously said, "What is going on? Baiji, could it be that there is some misunderstanding? Miss is here, I will definitely clear your name. Quickly tell me." She was very anxious and wanted to help Baiji clear her name. This was because, in Lian Xiao's opinion, Baiji really had no reason to frame Jiang Ruan, and it was even more impossible for her to be a mole, as the informant had said. However, Baiji didn't clarify as she hoped. She just smiled and said, "It's not a misunderstanding. I am the mole around Mississippi. Miss has always been observant, and this time you didn't catch the wrong person. She glanced at Lien Xiao and said softly, I'm sorry, I lied to you. How is this possible? Lien Xiao couldn't hold it in any longer and rushed forward to grab Baiji's sleeve. Her expression was a little agitated, and she didn't care that there were so many people present. Like a bamboo tube spilling beans, she said, you and I have served Miss since we were young. Everyone can clearly see how we treat Mississippi. At that time in the manor, you also wholeheartedly helped Mississippi. After all these years, I have the right to say what kind of person you are. Baiji, do you have any difficulties? We have been friends for many years, and I regard you as one of us. If you tell me, I will definitely help you. Did something happen to you? Baiji was slightly stunned, but she used more force to pull Lien Xiao's hand from her sleeve and said, I have nothing to say, and I don't have any difficulties. You don't trust me, but do you not trust Miss? When has she ever caught the wrong person? Lien Xiao was shocked by the determination in Baiji's eyes and couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Looking at the woman in front of her again, she only felt that she was a complete stranger. She was completely different from the friend who had been by her side in the past. She looked at Jiang Ruan in confusion, but Jiang Ruan's expression didn't change. She only said to the surrounding secret guards, all of you can leave, just leave a few people to guard outside the courtyard. Young Furen, a secret guard, said worriedly, young Furen's safety is important. She's just a defenseless woman, why worry? Tianzhu being here is enough, Jiang Ruan said lightly. The surrounding secret guards saw her firm attitude and knew that Jiang Ruan wasn't someone who could be easily swayed, so they could only retreat outside the courtyard. Only Lien Xiao, Tianzhu, Jiang Ruan, and Baiji were left in the courtyard. Miss has always treated you well, why did you do this? Lu Zhu was the first to lose her composure. She had a temperament that made a clear distinction between love and hate, and she had always cherished Jiang Ruan as a family member from the bottom of her heart. Suddenly discovering that Baiji was the one who had secretly plotted to harm Jiang Ruan, the anger in her heart could be imagined. Previously, she still had some doubts that Baiji had been wrongly accused. But now, seeing Baiji's attitude and Jiang Ruan's certainty, Lu Zhu also saw some clues. She was filled with righteous indignation towards Baiji. However, Baiji didn't answer Lu Zhu's words. She only looked at Jiang Ruan and said, Miss set up this trap today just to catch me. Miss already knew that I was the one who drew the poison. Yes. Jiang Ruan said lightly, previously, when I said that I had found the mastermind and wanted to enter the palace to set up a trap, I deliberately said it for you to hear. I knew that you would think of a way to spread the news, so I specially ordered people to wait in the fu to catch the ghost. Miss has always been smart, nothing can be hidden from your eyes. Baiji smiled. Her expression was actually very calm. When did Miss discover that this servant was the spy? A strange emotion flashed through Jiang Ruan's beautiful eyes. Her red lips slightly hooked, but her smile was somewhat cold. Baiji, if I could, the person I least want to suspect is you. She said lightly, seemingly without any emotion, you are the maidservant that my mother gave me, and you have always been by my side. You have accompanied me for too long. I have always believed that the person who can accompany me to the end will never betray me. If there are few people in this world that I trust, Baiji, you can be considered one of them. Baiji was stunned, as if she hadn't expected Jiang Ruan to say such words. Her lips moved, but in the end, she still remained silent. My meals in the fu have all passed through Steward Lin's hands. The fu is very strict with these matters, so I don't doubt that there is any mistake. If there is a place where the poison was introduced, it must have been outside. I thought that it was in the palace, or that Jiang Dan had done something, until later I remembered that on the day I married Xiao Xiao, when we were waiting in the bridal chamber, Lu Zhu was afraid that I would be hungry, so she gave me pastries, and you gave me a cup of tea. Lu Zhu also seemed to recall, yes, because I was afraid that Miss would eat the pastries and choke, Sister Baiji gave you a cup of tea. Could it be that there is a problem with the tea? But just based on a cup of tea, how can Miss conclude that this servant did it? Bai Ji smiled. A cup of tea indeed cannot prove anything, perhaps it was thrown in by someone else. But you know that I am not used to eating things that are too sweet. The pastries that day were already very sweet, but you still brought me honey lotus leaf water to drink. This may not seem like anything, but for you, Bai Ji, you have followed me for more than 10 years, and no one knows my eating habits better than you. You are my first-class maidservant, and you have always done things properly, so you would not make such a mistake. The reason why you did this was because you were flustered, and did not notice these things. Pastries that are too sweet and tea that is too sweet. Bai Ji, in your normal state, you would not do this. Lian Xiao paused and looked up at Bai Ji. She and Bai Ji had served Jiang Ruan together for so many years, so naturally, she knew that what Jiang Ruan said was right. Bai Ji had always been meticulous about Jiang Ruan's daily life, and with her cautious temperament, she would not make such a mistake. After a while, Bai Ji laughed lightly. Miss is indeed very meticulous, but I did not expect that such a small detail would betray this servant. This servant is sincerely convinced. No, it is not just this. Jiang Ruan looked at the burning torch, the bright light illuminating everything until there was no place to hide. And her face carried a kind of austere beauty. She said, also, when I came back, Lian Xiao and the others surrounded me. They were happy that I was detoxified, but only you were sad. Bai Ji was puzzled. This servant was sad because I was worried about Miss. What is wrong with that? Yes, you should be worried about me. As a personal servant, it is understandable to worry about the master's injury. But a normal person would first rejoice that someone else did not die. Bai Ji, from the moment you saw me, you didn't look happy at all. This is unusual. It's as if you don't feel happy because I'm better. Instead, you're worried and sad. What are you sad about? Is it because you failed? She asked. Bai Ji paused and looked at Jiang Ruan in a trance. So I also gave myself away here. Not only that, when I returned to the Fu, I saw that the house was in a mess, as if no one had tidied it up. You said that it was because everyone was worried about my injury, so no one was in the mood to clean it up. Jiang Ruan shook her head. This sentence is suitable for Lian Xiao and Lu Zhu, because they are impatient and cannot hide things in their hearts. Once something happened to me, they would not have any other thoughts. But you are different, Bai Ji. You have been with me for so many years, and your temperament is the calmest. Even when I fell into the water at Zhonglan's manor and did not wake up, you would still do all the trivial things in an orderly manner. Because you are a very assertive person, you will not change because of external changes. Will you not be in the mood to do things because of my injury? No, you are just worried because there is something in your heart, and you cannot calm down. Finally, she suspected Bai Ji, and perhaps there was also the warning about the dream of the previous life. In the previous life, Lian Xiao died under Jiang Quan's hand, but Bai Ji stayed behind to accompany her into the palace. At first, she thought that Bai Ji had a soft temperament, and Xia Yan's heart had softened. Now, it seemed that no matter what kind of person Bai Ji was, with Xia Yan's cautious temperament, how could she have allowed her to bring her trusted aide into the palace? Bai Ji looked at Jiang Ruan and suddenly took a step forward. Tianzhu vigilantly blocked in front of Jiang Ruan. Tianzhu was the latest to arrive, and did not have the deep feelings for Bai Ji like Lian Xiao. Now, Bai Ji's identity as a spy was confirmed. The brocade uniform guards hated people who betrayed their masters the most. In the eyes of India, Bai Ji was just an enemy. Once Tianzhu made her move, Bai Ji stopped in her tracks. She looked at Jiang Ruan and pondered for a while before smiling bitterly. Everything that Miss has said is correct. After following Miss for so many years, Miss knows this servant like the back of your hand. What's more, Miss is a person who easily guesses people's hearts. This little bit of skill of this servant, in front of Miss, is not something that can be put on the table. It will only be a source of ridicule. No, Jiang Ruan said indifferently, it is not because I understand you that I know your abnormality, and it is not because I am good at guessing people's hearts that I know that you are a spy. The only reason I can understand your identity is because you deliberately revealed it to me. She crossed Tianzhu and slowly walked in front of Baiji. She looked at Baiji calmly and spat out the truth. These clues were deliberately revealed to me by you. You no longer want to hide your identity. You hoped that I would find out that rather than saying that I arranged this ghost hunt, it would be more accurate to say that you borrowed my hands to arrange it. Baiji was stunned for a moment, then she smiled and said, Miss really knows how to joke. I am not an idiot. Why would I take the initiative to hand over my weakness to someone else so that they could catch me? Why would I do this? Yes, Jiang Yuan sighed and stared intently at her eyes. I also want to know, why would you do this? That pair of upturned charming eyes had a sharp gaze, as if it wanted to strip away all pretense, and all the thoughts in one's heart seemed to have no place to hide in front of that pair of bright eyes. Baiji felt somewhat restless. She gritted her teeth and persistently looked at Jiang Yuan. Didn't you choose this method to tell me the truth? Jiang Yuan's voice was gentle and seemed to contain a kind of temptation and bewitchment, causing people to involuntarily speak out their inner thoughts. Baiji, if you have any difficulties, you can tell me. This is not only an explanation for me, but also for yourself. You should at least give me an explanation for being betrayed by a maidservant who has been by your side for more than 10 years. Otherwise, I will also think that I am such a master who can't keep people. Both Dezhu and Lian Xiao looked at Baiji. As sisters who had been together day and night, in one night, she had become their enemy. This was really an unacceptable fact. Lian Xiao said, Baiji, you should at least tell us the reason. Under such intense gazes, Baiji finally lowered her head. When she raised her eyes again, her gaze was already very calm, as if she had made an important decision. She said, Mrs. Guess is right, it is not that Miss can't keep people. The reason why Baiji was the one who induced the poison was because Baiji was originally De Furin's person. How could that be? Dezhu said in surprise, De Furin is already dead, how could she let you poison Miss? At that time, Lian Xiao and I were chosen by the former madam to be given to Miss, but we are different. Lian Xiao's background is clean, she is the daughter of the minister's household. Nubi's family lives in a manor under the minister's mansion. Nubi's older brother works under De Furin's steward. De Furin wants Nubi to come and take care of Miss, but she holds Nubi's family's contract in her hands. Lian Xiao did not expect that there would be such a thing. She had always thought that Baiji was like her, personally chosen by Zhao Mei to serve Jiang Yuan, so naturally, her background was also clean. Who knew that Baiji's purpose of being sent here was not so simple? Although De Furin wanted me to follow Miss, she did not ask me to do anything. She only occasionally asked about Miss's situation. I did not dare to stop her. Later on, Miss went to the manor, and my family was fortunate enough to be freed from their slave status. I have always been by Miss's side. Because there is no longer any threat, I want to serve Miss wholeheartedly, as compensation for the past few years. She paused and laughed. In the past, Miss's temperament was soft and gentle, and you were often bullied. Later on, at Zhuangzi Mountain, for some reason, your temperament changed. I am truly happy for Mississippi. Later on, De Furin also died, and I thought that the past would be the past forever, as long as I continue living like this with Mississippi. Who knew that a few days ago, someone took my mother's keepsake and gave it to me? Someone found my family and wanted me to poison Miss, otherwise, my family's lives would be in danger. So in order to protect your family, you used poison on Miss? Lian Xiao asked in surprise. Perhaps this was pardonable, but as a servant, she could never betray her master. Therefore, Lian Xiao did not approve of Baiji's actions. She immediately said, even so, when you did this, did you think of Miss? Let's not talk about the past for now. Even now, you can tell Miss about this. Miss is so smart, she will definitely think of a way to solve this problem for you. You don't understand. Baiji shouted, Lian Xiao, your family is innocent, and can be a loyal servant in front of master. But I am De Furin's person. If this matter is implicated, even if I did not do anything to Miss, the past will be dug up, and Miss will not see me in the future. Once this matter is brought up, I can never go back to the past. Moreover, no matter how resourceful Miss is, I would never dare to play around with the lives of my family. I still have my elder brother and younger brother, I cannot put them in danger because of me. You are so stubborn. Lian Xiao said angrily. You can scold me or blame me, I don't care. Bai Ji smiled bitterly, after all, I have committed such a heinous crime. No matter how Miss punishes me, I will have no regrets. Then who was the person who made you poison Miss? Lu Zhu asked anxiously. I don't know. Bai Ji shook her head, he sent a message to me by tying a dart to a slip of paper. I don't know who that person is, and with the wall separating us, I don't know what he looks like. I only have one question for you, Jiang Ruan said indifferently. More than 10 years ago, when Jiang Dan poisoned my mother, did you know? Lu Zhu and Lian Xiao were shocked. They did not know that Jiang Dan had poisoned her. Originally, they did not know who the person behind the Xia Fu was, but it turned out to be Jiang Dan. Bai Ji was silent for a moment before she nodded. Jiang Ruan looked at her coldly. Previously, her attitude towards Bai Ji had always been gentle, and she did not show any anger at being betrayed. But now, her indifference made people feel cold. She said, You have been with me for so many years, and as you said, you have not done anything to harm me. In the most difficult times, it was you and Lian Xiao who were by my side. Although I did not say it, as long as I am safe in this world, I will use all my power to protect you. Bai Ji, I will not pursue the matter of you luring poison to me. You did these things for your family. If it were me, I might not have done better than you. But you watched helplessly as my mother was harmed by Jiang Dan's poison. You could have taken the initiative to warn me like you did today. You did not say anything. Although everyone has their own master, and this is pardonable, I will never be able to forgive you for this. Bai Ji was shocked and suddenly raised her head to look at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan's temperament had always been cold. On the surface, she did not seem to care much about anything, so she had always been very tolerant towards the mistakes of her servants. But only those who were close to her knew that she could be very crazy and stubborn about certain things. Previously, Bai Ji was certain that Jiang Ruan would be disappointed in her because of this matter, but she would not really vent her anger on her. But now, Jiang Ruan's words had clearly expressed that she and Imo Tiange were in opposing camps. I have nothing to say about you luring poison to me. I cannot forgive you for watching my mother stand by and do nothing. Bai Ji, the relationship between you and me is that of a master and servant. In this world, we no longer have any connection. Jiang Ruan's words were powerful and unquestionable. Lian Xiao, Lu Zhu, and Tian Zhu stood silently at the side, no one spoke. Bai Ji was dumbstruck. Small snowflakes fell on her body, and the fire burned silently in the snow. She felt very lonely, as if everything in the world had abandoned her. After a moment, she suddenly laughed softly. Then, her laughter became louder and louder, almost to the point of tears. She said, I did not complete that person's task. In the end, he will not forgive me. He is afraid that I will bite him again. In the end, there is only one way. Before her voice died away, she suddenly slammed her head against the stone wall. She was originally very close to the stone wall, and Tian Zhu, who was the best at martial arts, was by Jiang Ruan's side to protect her. There was simply no time to save her. This time, Bai Ji used all her strength. It was obvious that she was wholeheartedly seeking death. There was only a muffled sound, and Lian Xiao cried out in alarm. Bai Ji fell limply, and the blood on her forehead was a ghastly sight. She breathed in big mouthfuls, and blood flowed continuously from her mouth, drenching the snow beneath her into a captivating red. She panted, and her voice was like a broken bellows. With great difficulty, one could make out an unspoken sentence, sorry. The snow once again fell into silence. There was no sound at all. Large pieces of snow fell, almost drowning the bloodstains on the ground. Jiang Ruan's voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. She said, "Bury him." She turned and walked out of the courtyard, her long crimson skirt blending with the blood on the ground. Her expression was ice cold, and her back was perfectly straight. She walked coldly and resolutely, never turning back to look at the figure on the ground again. However, she walked faster and faster, almost as if she was jogging in the snow. Finally, after rushing out of the courtyard, she stopped abruptly. With one hand supporting herself against the vermilion pillar, she only felt that her whole body was unusually cold. She tightly pursed her lips. The corners of her mouth were stiff, but the rims of her eyes were slightly red. A cold and cheerless figure walked out from behind her and stood behind her. He slowly pulled her shoulders and embraced her in his arms. The young man's features were handsome, and his slender figure seemed to contain an infinite power that made people feel at ease. In this cold winter day, there was a trace of warmth. "Xiao Xiao, I am very sad." Jiang Ruan's voice had a weariness that was not usually present. She reached out and hugged the young man's thin waist, and buried her head in his shoulder. "Don't betray me." Chapter 196. Xiao Xiao looked down at the woman in his arms. Although he had not entered the courtyard, he was very clear about what had happened. He knew that Jiang Ruan usually did not care about anything, but in reality, she was just not used to showing it. These servant girls had grown up with her, and people always put 120% of their trust in companions who supported and befriended them. But in the end, she found out that it was just a lie in the name of loyalty. She was someone who could not bear to have sand in her eyes, so one could imagine the sadness in her heart. He patted Jiang Ruan's back and did not speak. In such a generous and warm embrace, Jiang Ruan's mood gradually calmed down. In fact, she was most unwilling to suspect Bai Ji. In this life, only Bai Ji had accompanied her to the end in her previous life. Now, it seemed that Bai Ji had been Xia Yan's person from the beginning. Although Xia Yan had not made her do anything to harm her, their positions had been hostile from the beginning. In the end, she had handed Pei over to Bai Ji, hoping that Bai Ji could take Pei and escape. But in the end, Pei had still fallen into Li Dong's hands. Perhaps Bai Ji had simply handed Pei over to Jiang Su Su, or perhaps she really had not managed to escape. But as for what the situation was, only Bai Ji from the previous life could answer. But this matter was like a thorn stuck in her throat. Whenever she thought of this, she would suspect that in the end, it was Bai Ji who had personally sent Pei to a dead end. She had always been a stubborn person. Once she had this suspicion, she would never be able to let go of Bai Ji. In this world, there were so many coincidences, who could know? She gently broke free from Xiao Xiao's embrace, feeling that she had lost her composure just now. Seeing this, Xiao Xiao thought about it and said, "Tomorrow, go to the palace and take a look at Xian Pei." Jiang Ruan was startled. For a moment, she almost thought that Xiao Xiao already knew the cause and effect of the matter. She probed, "Why? He seems to have something to say to you." Xiao Xiao pursed his lips. "You have not been to the palace for a long time." Admittedly, his words were meant to divert Jiang Ruan's attention and lighten her mood, but Jiang Ruan was still shocked. What could Xian Pei have to say to her? In this life, the two of them had almost no connection. However, what Xiao Xiao meant was that Xian Pei had taken the initiative to look for him. The conjecture that had surfaced in her heart at that time once again appeared in her mind. Jiang Ruan tried to restrain herself from thinking about it, but she could not help but think in that direction. "Don't worry." Xiao Xiao seemed to have noticed her uneasiness and comforted her, "You'll know what's going on when you get there. I'll protect you." Every time, he would straightforwardly express his standpoint of standing by her side. Jiang Ruan raised her eyes to look at him. The youth's features were cold and elegant, but the words he spoke had the power to convince people. It was as if as long as it came out of his mouth, he would definitely be able to accomplish it. She smiled faintly, temporarily suppressing the uneasiness in her heart, and only said to Xiao Xiao, "All right." It snowed for an entire night. When they woke up the next day, the fresh snow covered the bloodstains on the ground. The soul-stirring scene from last night had disappeared. Everything was calm as if nothing had happened. Not far from the prince's mansion, there was a newly built grave that seemed to have been built overnight. It was not extravagant, but it was not crude either. It was very meticulous. There was a stone tablet without a single word on it, and it was unknown who had erected it. Two young women squatted in front of the grave. In front of them was an iron basin filled with burning paper money. A few sticks of incense stood in the censer. As Lian Xiao burned the money, she choked with sobs and said, "Bai Ji, in this life, we can be considered sisters. Reincarnate into a good body, and don't be a servant in your next life. As you said, even being a peasant girl is good. After all, fate is always in our own hands." Although Lu Zhu was angry that Bai Ji had drawn the poison to Jiang Yuan, the tragic situation last night made her sigh in her heart. She was a soft-hearted person. In addition, ever since she had followed Jiang Yuan, she and Bai Ji had been together for so many years. Bai Ji's temperament was gentle, and she often took care of her like a big sister. Thinking of this, the rims of Lu Zhu's eyes became somewhat red. Her voice was somewhat stifled. "Bai Ji Jijia, if there is a next life, when we meet again, I hope to have the honor of being sisters with you again." Both of them were somewhat sorrowful, and after much difficulty, they finished burning the paper money in the silver basin. Both of them, who had always been lively, were somewhat solemn. Jiang Yuan did not come to offer her condolences. They were master and servant, but now, they did not know how they should meet each other. This was really ridiculous. Returning to the Wang Fu, Jin Er saw Lu Zhu's dejected expression. For the first time, he did not deliberately tease her. Instead, he stood behind her for a while before reaching out his hand to hand her a handkerchief. "Hey, you look so ugly when you cry." However, Lu Zhu was not in the mood to bicker with him. She hung her head and did not take the handkerchief. Seeing this, Jin Er, who was a veteran of playing with women, was at a loss. After a long while, he hesitantly moved over, tightly gripping the handkerchief as he stood in front of Lu Zhu. She raised her head to look at him in astonishment. Jin Er held the handkerchief and wiped the tears off her face. He said rather unnaturally, "How can there be someone crying in the Wang Fu? It's really an eyesore." Lu Zhu stood there differently, as if she was enduring something. Jin Er's hand could not help but stiffen. He looked at her worriedly, and for the first time, he could not help but soften his voice. "What's wrong?" As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Zhu finally could not bear it any longer. She grabbed onto his lapel, buried her face in it, and burst into tears. Jin Er's body was somewhat stiff, and he looked at Lu Zhu, who was clutching onto his clothes, not knowing what to do. In the Wang Fu, Lu Zhu had always been a girl who loved to laugh. Her laughter was also very infectious, as if no matter how big the matter was, it was no big deal to her. This was the first time he had seen her so sad. Jin Er only felt that her crying made his heart ache. Finally, he plucked up the courage to reach out and pull her into his embrace, comforting her in a low voice. In the end, Jiang Yuan did not know about Lu Zhu and Jin Er's situation. After Lian Xiao returned to the Fu, she brought Lian Xiao and Tian Zhu into the palace. Ever since she had been poisoned, she had never entered the palace again. Even Empress Dowager Ida could not justify it, so today, she took this opportunity to enter the palace. Jiang Yuan first went to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful to see Empress Dowager Ida. Empress Dowager Ida felt that it was a little strange that she had not seen Jiang Yuan for a long time. Jiang Yuan only said that she had caught a cold and had recuperated in the Wang Fu for more than 10 days. Only then did Empress Dowager Ida feel at ease. She pulled Jiang Yuan aside and asked her for a while whether she got along well with Xiao Xiao and his wife. Jiang Yuan answered all of them. Empress Dowager Ida was very satisfied with the peaceful relationship between her and Xiao Xiao. She was probably also happy with the golden jade marriage that she had created, so she asked Jiang Ruan to stay for lunch. However, since Jiang Ruan was now married and had become Jining Wangfei, she naturally did not have to stay in the Princess Palace Hall. When Empress Dowager Ida took her lunch break, Jiang Ruan bade farewell to Yang Gugu. However, she did not directly leave the palace, as she still remembered Xiao Xiao's words. She went straight to the southern Yuan to see Xian Pei. In her previous life, Jiang Ruan had walked around the palace for a long time, so she knew where the southern Yuan was. However, at that time, Xian Pei was not favored. Before she had raised him by her side, he had only lived in an extremely remote and gloomy courtyard. Now, Xian Pei's status in the palace was very different, and he was deeply favored by the emperor. The emperor's favor might be a kind of poison, as he would place him in a position where everyone could see him, and countless cold arrows and hidden knives would be aimed at him. But at the same time, it was also a protective talisman that was more useful than anything else. As long as the emperor liked him, the power of any cold arrows aimed at him would be greatly reduced. The closer she got to the southern Yuan, the more nervous she became. Since her rebirth, it was very rare for her to be so nervous. Tianzhu and Lian Xiao, who were following beside her, noticed Jiang Ruan's abnormality. Tianzhu stopped and said, "Young madam, is there something wrong?" Jiang Ruan suddenly returned to her senses and shook her head. "It's nothing." She forced herself to calm down. Everything that was happening now was just her imagination running wild. No one could say for sure what the truth was. When she arrived at the entrance of the southern Yuan, the young eunuch who was guarding the door saw her from afar and immediately bowed. "This servant greets Wang Fei." Jiang Ruan was slightly startled. In the palace, most of the time, the servants called her Hong and Junju. Now that she had suddenly heard them call her Wang Fei, the deeper meaning behind it was unknown. Just like when a princess married, she still addressed herself as a princess in the palace, but recently, people in the palace called her Wang Fei. This indirectly revealed a meaning. The title of Wang Fei of Jining Wang Fu was more honorable than that of Hong and Junju. It also further illustrated Xiao Xiao's position in the palace. A delicate and pretty palace maid walked out. After seeing Jiang Ruan, she first looked at Tianzhu, then smiled and said, "This servant is Mingyu, who serves by His Highness's side. His Highness has asked this servant to escort Wang Fei in. Wang Fei, please follow this servant." Jiang Ruan naturally saw the look that Mingyu gave Tianzhu. At first, she was somewhat puzzled, but then she understood. Then, she felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Why would Xiao Xiao send his secret guard to Xian Pei's side? However, since it was Xiao Xiao's person, she was completely at ease. She then followed Mingyu into the southern Yuan. Passing through the front hall, she saw the magnificent furnishings inside. She also knew that Xian Pei had won the emperor's favor, and his days were very comfortable. She was slightly relieved. Mingyu stopped in front of the study and said with a smile, "His Highness is waiting for Wang Fei in the study." After saying this, she took a step back and indicated for Jiang Ruan to enter alone. Lian Xiao was still a little nervous, fearing that Jiang Ruan would fall into someone else's trap, so she wanted to follow. Unexpectedly, Tianzhu grabbed her arm and shook her head at her. Tianzhu came from the brocade guards, and her skills were excellent. Lian Xiao naturally believed in Tianzhu. Although she did not understand, she had no intention of following in. Jiang Ruan herself did not comment. She trusted Xiao Xiao's people. Moreover, in her heart, Xian Pei would always be that beautiful and delicate child from her previous life. No matter how he changed, in front of her, he would always be a childlike existence. She would not worry that Xian Pei would want to harm her, that was a mother's instinct. Therefore, Jiang Ruan only paused slightly, then pushed the door open and walked in without looking back. The light in the study was very dim, and the curtains had already been drawn. Thus, it was somewhat blurry. Jiang Ruan turned around and closed the door, then walked towards the desk. In front of the desk, a small person was sitting on a spacious chair. That person was holding a brush and seemed to be writing something. He had a serious appearance, but because he was too small, he looked a little comical. It submerged the usual sense of alienation and estrangement. Jiang Ruan slowly walked towards him. The child's head was lowered as he wrote earnestly. His posture as he held the pen was inexplicably familiar. With his head lowered, she could see his delicate nose and rosy lips. His skin was like that of a delicate jade carving doll. Jiang Ruan looked at him silently. In the dim light, she could finally see the words on the paper clearly. It was actually 4 words. 2 names. One was Jiang Ruan, and the other was Xian Pei. Jiang Ruan felt as if she had been struck by lightning, and her whole body was rooted to the ground. It was as if someone had torn out a picture scroll from her brain and suddenly revealed it in front of her. It was in a simple and crude palace. He was wearing clothes that did not fit him, but he had an exceptionally delicate appearance. The child clumsily held the brush and asked, "Imperial Mother, look, Pei has learned to write his and Imperial Mother's names." The child's smile was joyous, but the words he said made one's heart ache. He was a dignified prince of a country, yet he was neglected to this extent. Not even a teacher had been invited. Perhaps no one would pay attention to whether this unfavored prince was learned or not. However, as his imperial mother, Xian Pei's handwriting was taught by her. The first time she taught Xian Pei to write his and his own names, Xian Pei had said this. Now, that snow-white Xian paper still had the same 2 names, but the handwriting was exactly the same as in her previous life. Even every detail was exactly the same. The scene in front of her eyes and the scene in her memory suddenly overlapped. For a moment, Jiang Ruan could not tell which night was in front of her. Perhaps all of this was just a dream, and she was in reality, or was it a dream? Xian Pei put down the brush in his hand. As if he had heard her voice, he finally raised his head. Seeing that it was her, he smiled sweetly and said, "Imperial Mother, Pei has waited for you for a long time." Jiang Ruan's footsteps paused, and she abruptly took 2 steps back. Her eyes, which had always been calm and steady, were filled with absent-mindedness and confusion, as well as disbelief and shock. She murmured, "What did you say? Imperial Mother still intends to recognize me?" "I am Pei, Xian Pei said. Jiang Ruan's eyes widened, and she felt her mind go blank. She stared blankly at the elegant youth in front of her. He was clearly the same as the Pei from her previous life, but his smile was exquisite and contained a deep meaning. He was definitely not the innocent and kind child who didn't understand anything in her previous life. He was much smarter than the Pei from her previous life. Xian Pei laughed bitterly and raised his head to look at Jiang Ruan. He slowly retracted his smile and no longer looked at her with that innocent expression. He said, "Imperial Mother died under the rod, and after that, Pei also followed her to the Yellow Springs. I thought that my life would be over. Who would have thought that the heavens would give me another chance at life, and even more so, I never thought that I would be able to see Imperial Mother again in this life." He looked at Jiang Ruan and said, "To this day, Imperial Mother, are you still not willing to recognize me?" Every word that came out of his mouth was like a heavy hammer pounding on Jiang Ruan's heart. No one would know about these things, and he was not lying. Even the trace of disbelief that she had previously felt was now completely gone. Jiang Ruan didn't know whether she was happy or sad in her heart, but she felt a kind of pleasant surprise that she had regained what she had lost. She took a big step forward and reached out to touch Xian Pei's face, but her hands suddenly stopped in front of Xian Pei. For a moment, she felt somewhat timid, and for the first time, she said with some doubt, "You are really him?" Imperial Mother taught Pei to write his own name. Pei wrote Imperial Mother's and his name together, and from then on, we will never be separated again. Xian Pei smiled with tears in his eyes. Jiang Ruan was startled. At that time, she had taught Xian Pei to write his own name and his own. Indeed, Xian Pei had said so. Now, these words were still in her ears, and when they came out of Xian Pei's mouth, Jiang Ruan finally pulled Xian Pei into her embrace. That's right, you are him, you are Pei. Why didn't I think that since I was alive at that time, you are also a possibility? Pei, it's all my fault. I didn't come to find you earlier. If only I could have recognized you earlier. You were alone in the palace, so you must have been very afraid. Her voice trembled with excitement. Even the people closest to her had never seen Jiang Ruan like this. She was a cold and hard stone, and Xian Pei was her only softness. In her previous life, Xian Pei had died, and in this life, her entire body was hard, and even the last trace of softness was gone. However, Xian Pei had regained what she had lost, and this evoked her true nature, the most gentle part of the Jiang Ruan who had died in her previous life. I am not afraid. On the contrary, Xian Pei comforted her softly, I am living very well in the palace. I know how to protect myself, and I also want to help Imperial Mother take revenge. I always thought that Imperial Mother was different from the Imperial Mother in my previous life. At that time, Imperial Mother helped me out in front of Princess Yi, so I thought that in this life, I only needed to protect Imperial Mother. Unexpectedly, when Imperial Mother was poisoned, I found out from Jinying Wang that Imperial Mother was still the same Imperial Mother. Jiang Ruan stared blankly. How did Xiao Xiao know about this? She was somewhat uncertain. At that time, when she was unconscious, she had said some words, and Mr. Hakone Serpent had also mentioned this. Xiao Xiao was an intelligent person, so naturally, he could infer a little bit from it. However, he had actually told this to Xian Pei. Had he already guessed the relationship between her and Xian Pei? He didn't have a clear idea in his mind. Jiang Ruan slowly let go of his hand. She pulled Xian Pei to the hard mattress at the side and sat down. As if they had often done this in their previous life, she said, Pei, at the end of your previous life, what happened to you? How were you caught at that time? When Xian Pei heard this, he bit his lip. Even though his mind was no different from that of an adult now. But as soon as this matter was mentioned, those gray memories that had been sealed for a long time came back to him, and it still made him feel a little cold. He paused, then said, at that time, Imperial Mother let Bai Ji Jie take me to escape along the secret passage, but halfway through, someone rushed over and killed Bai Ji Jie. I was caught, and later. Thinking of that humiliating memory, Xian Pei closed his eyes. Later, Imperial Mother was killed by a random stick. I bit off that person's ear. He flew into a rage and killed me with a knife. Jiang Ruan suddenly pulled him into her embrace. All right, don't say any more. She took a deep breath. I didn't protect you well. This has nothing to do with Imperial Mother. Xian Pei gritted his teeth. All of this was just Xian Li's trick. If it weren't for him, Imperial Mother wouldn't have been wrongly accused and ended up like that. So, in this life, the only thing I want to do is to defeat Xian Pei and not let him sit firmly in that position. The youth's brows were firm and resolute, and when he mentioned Xian Pei, the coldness in his eyes was exactly the same as Jiang Ruan's. Jiang Ruan looked at him, and a trace of inexplicable melancholy suddenly flashed through her heart. She said, then tell me, what have you done in this life? How have you been all these years? I found that I had returned to many years ago, and I thought it was just a dream. Xian Pei slowly said, later, I discovered that it wasn't a dream, and I couldn't change the fact that my birth mother had already passed away. Coinciding with the years when Imperial Consort Chen was most favored, the princes who were slightly favored by Imperial Father all died inexplicably. Others don't know why, but I know that it was the doing of that mother and son pair. Xian Pei sneered. Unfortunately, at that time, I was still too young, and my ability was too weak, so I didn't dare to confront them head-on. So, I pretended to be stupid and was willing to be an unfavored prince, just like in my previous life. At least, I could save my life. Jiang Ruan gently stroked his head. Pei, did very well, you are very smart. But this is really too slow, Xian Pei muttered. I can't just save my life, I also have to avenge Imperial Mother and myself. Xian Pei has always placed his chips in the Imperial Court, but I don't want him to live too smoothly. These years, I have also secretly cultivated a portion of people. Some are in the Imperial Court, and some are outside the palace. Even if Xianli has planted people everywhere in the Imperial Court, at least in terms of shops, if I want to trip him up, it is as easy as turning my hand. Speaking up to this point, Xian Pei smiled craftily at Jiang Yuan. If he wants to sit firmly on the throne, he needs a steady stream of silver. But the silver is all in my hands, so it won't be so smooth for him. Jiang Yuan suddenly understood. No wonder in her previous life, Xianli had always been like a fish in water, but in this life, he had been going downhill. He was even worse than a few years in her previous life. Admittedly, Jiang Yuan had played a part in this, but she did not expect that Xian Pei would also play a part in it. The enemy was in the light, while he was in the dark. No matter what, Xianli could not avoid the fate of falling. Jiang Yuan could not help but laugh. When did you become so crafty? In my previous life, Imperial Mother protected me, but I could only watch helplessly as Imperial Mother died in front of me. A trace of coldness flashed through Xian Pei's eyes. In this life, it is up to me to protect Imperial Mother. If someone comes looking for trouble with Imperial Mother, I will think of all ways to make them pay 100, 1,000, 10 times the price. Jiang Yuan's gaze fell on Xian Pei. The youth was not tall, and the childishness on his face did not seem to have faded. He was born beautiful and fragile, like a delicate doll. However, the unswerving determination between his brows could not be ignored, and when he spoke, his voice was powerful and resonant. He was still the original Xian Pei, but in the end, he was not the same Xian Pei. Pei, you have grown up. Jiang Yuan smiled. Imperial Mother, in my previous life and this life, I am also in my 20s. Xian Pei blinked. Imperial Mother cannot look at me as if I were a child. Because I am not a child. He glanced at Jiang Yuan and suddenly smiled. However, although Imperial Mother has lived for so long, your appearance is still as beautiful as in your previous life. I just don't know if Xiao Wangye will go mad with anger when he finds out that his wife is actually so much older than him. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.